Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Development Control B. We're not expecting any fire alarm tests today, so if you hear an alarm, that means that we should all exit by the main door through which you came, and we assemble outside in front of the cathedral. Toilets, if you require, are just down the stairs for women's toilets, and I think further along for ladies' toilets. Apologies for absence. I know that Councillor Breckles is still recovering, so we have Councillor Zoe Peat. Thank you for coming along. Any other apologies?
Chair, no, that's the only one I was going to note.
That's the only one, and looks to me like the only one as well, I think. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest for this meeting? Nope. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are you happy to approve those minutes? Anyone got any corrections? Anything? No. Could I have a proposer and a seconder for approving the minutes of the previous meeting? Zoe, you're welcome to. Paula, second. Okay, those are then approved and will be signed. We have no outstanding actions. Jonathan, would you take us through the appeals, please? And I will, as always, just leave a gap at the end if any councillors want to ask any questions to learn a little bit more about particular appeals or our general approach to appeals. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't really going to comment on any particular appeal this afternoon, but really just to make a general point, really, just in terms of the appeal decisions that have been received. And really, members may note that the number that have been allowed are higher, really, than we've been used to as an overall proportion. And this is something that is of concern to us. We are really looking into this, trying to understand kind of what the trends are and analysing whether there are any kind of themes that we need to look at and perhaps kind of reflect on. That work is ongoing, and is our intention just to share that hopefully at the next DC Leeds meeting, which I believe is in a few weeks' time. So yeah, really that's just a general comment on appeals, but as ever, if there is anything in particular or any decisions that I can share after this meeting, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about particular appeals? Or Councillor Poultney?
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could characterise that the striking number of them seem to be appeals against non-determination. I'm just wondering, since we've taken step towards getting the backlog of applications under control, is there an anticipation that those will come down? And how many of those, how much of this problem do you see as being caused by that?
Yeah, so I think what we are seeing is that the number of appeals against non-determination is coming down. I mean, I think those were a real feature of sort of the backlog scenario that we were dealing with, where we weren't able to issue decisions within the statutory timeframes. I think what we are seeing now, though, is with the increase in the number of determinations that have been made, and of course, those do include refusals. Those are obviously being appealed against and are also working their way through the system. So I think, part of the analysis will be, particularly in terms of those refusals, where inspectors have come to a different view on issues, is just to have a look at that, to analyse that, and, as I say, sort of reflect on it and see if we need to feed back in terms of the approach that we're taking.
Thank you. Any further questions? Enforcement. Anything you want to comment on, Jonathan, or has anyone got any questions as well?
Just a brief comment, if I may, please, Chair. There, unfortunately, aren't any enforcement notices that are listed under agenda item 7, but we do actually have 4 at the moment that are currently with our legal services team and will be issued imminently. So hopefully those will appear on the papers for the next committee. There is, however, an update report which is included, which provides more of an overview of just the work in the team and also the resourcing situation. And just as an update to that, we have now had an additional graduate planner who has joined the enforcement team to sort of bolster the capacity there to help with the enforcement work. And also just to say as well, it's our intention soon to send an invitation to councillors for a briefing regarding enforcement. This is something that we've done in the past. And the aim of that really will be to provide an overview again of the team, the work they do, and also to go into a little bit of detail around the local enforcement plan. So we'll share that soon.
Right, thank you. Anyone got any questions? Councillor Poultney again.
Thanks, Chair. It was just in respect of the, and thank you for the data, by the way. This was really, really helpful. I was most interested in those that were found to be below the intervention threshold. That's to say the cases where it was found that there was a legitimate grounds for enforcement, but it was felt not to be in the wider public interest to take further action. I was wondering particularly in terms of determining public interest, what is that process? Does triage in particular form a part of it as an allocation of resources given the constraints the team's been under? And I was wondering where that decision-making power sits. I would imagine it's obviously delegated, but I wasn't sure to whom, and what oversight there was of that process.
Yeah, so in terms of the of those cases that have been closed because they are below the intervention threshold, I mean, in enforcement terms, it's all about expediency. So it may well be the case that a development may be unauthorised, but if there isn't sufficient harm which really justifies formal action, then it wouldn't be expedient to take that. There are, as the report sets out in the table, there other kind of routes to resolving planning breaches, which include, for example, sort of negotiating solutions or potentially inviting a retrospective planning application for consideration. But yes, that is a delegated decision, but that's something that is actually covered in the local enforcement plan, and it would be our intention really to provide some more information and kind of insight into that when we hold a briefing.
Could I just check, when is that briefing scheduled for?
It's not yet, I don't think, but it's in the near future, is it?
Yeah, that's our intention. It will be in the near future. We've actually, I think, got a meeting in the diary next week just to kind of scope out actually the format of that. So I'd anticipate an invite, would follow quite soon after.
Fantastic. No, thank you. And thank you for your patience with this, Chair. It's something I know is very dear to members, and I'm really keen to see us make progress on it. Thanks, John.
It is actually. It's a big thing for members, and we get a lot of questions about it. Thank you. Anything further on enforcement? No? Okay. Well, welcome to members of the public who are here today. If you've not been before, what we do is we do take the public forum statements, questions before each of the items. And our first item today is in Central Ward. It is the former Peugeot garage, Clarence Road, Redcliff, Bristol, BS1 6PR. And I have a number of statements. I think we have a roving microphone up the top there. Yep, we do. And the first statement, I believe, and I apologise in advance to anyone whose name I mispronounce, is Zoe Sharp.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm Dandara Living's Bristol-based development manager. At a time when Bristol faces huge challenges meeting its housing needs, the partnership between the council and developers has never been more important. We're already proposing 1,400 homes across Bristol, 435 are with this application. We also understand that communities want to know what additional social value businesses bring to Bristol. We've been quietly supporting, with money, time and skills, some of the local charities and community groups that do such amazing work across the city. We've also now employed nearly 100 people and supported over 400 apprenticeship weeks. This proposal would create a further 282 jobs, 119 from the local area. A third of our contracts are placed with local businesses. That's 13.5 million so far. Approving this application will allow us to provide more homes, more jobs, and more social value to Bristol. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Amy Kington?
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm founder of Bristol Social Enterprise Community of Purpose, which supports thousands of less privileged young Bristolians. I grew up in Knoll and went to St Mary Redcliff School around the corner from this site. I love Bristol, but I believe it still has too many divisions, not least access to affordable homes and access to training and support that gives people a decent start in life. I support this application partly because it would deliver 43 decent homes at prices less privileged people can afford. But I also support this application because the developer is backing our amazing programme, Bristol Young Heroes Awards Purposeful Pathways. This gives youngsters the helping hand they need to get started in life. We've worked alongside Dandara for 2 years. They're a shining example of how business investing in our great city can also bring enormous social value. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Clara Morello?
Good afternoon, councillors. As co-director of the Actors Workshop Bristol, a small local charity offering outstanding professional training and industry progression to young actors from all backgrounds, plus access to live performances for inner-city children and communities, I passionately believe that everyone should have access to the arts, regardless of origin or income. Like all charities, funding is a struggle, as is finding a home. Dandara came to our rescue 2 years ago, providing us with a heavily subsidised studio as a meanwhile tenant at this location. From the start, Dandara Living have been an incredible, forward-thinking landlord, consistently going above and beyond to support our work and help us reach those who need us most. At this extremely challenging time for the arts, Dandara is enabling young performers and widening access to live theatre. In making your decision, please consider this important social value that Dandara Living brings to Bristol. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Jackie Pollard?
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm the lead architect for this scheme from the Bristol-based architects Stride Raglan. This development would transform this underused brownfield site into a vibrant, attractive, green and inclusive place where new and existing residents would feel safe and welcome. Working hand in hand with your officers, we've sifted through the design with a fine-tooth comb. We are proposing 2 extremely high-quality buildings that reflect Bristol's historic architecture. Working closely with Historic England, we've also been extremely careful to protect key historic views. This development will provide a really high-quality place to live, with more roof terraces than any other development in Bristol, plus private balconies or terraces for most apartments, bright rooms, high-quality communal internal amenity spaces, all things that nurture resident health and well-being. This will be a great place to live, an amazing first step in delivering the 2,500 homes next to Temple Meads that have been pledged within the Temple Quarter regeneration area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Luke Jones?
Good afternoon, councillors. Our Bristol-based team of landscape architects has worked closely with your design officers to create a transformative proposal for this pivotal site. Currently, the area is uninviting, dominated by vehicles and entirely devoid of nature. As one of the first locations seen upon leaving Temple Meads, it leaves a poor impression and fails to serve the community. Our proposal will fundamentally change this, delivering vibrant, welcoming public realm with 34 new trees and a 5,000% biodiversity net gain. The public space will be open to all, providing quiet, green environments within a bustling city. We also propose a segregated 3-metre wide cycle lane and a spacious 3.5 metre wide pavement along Temple Gate, completing the missing link in the existing cycle network. This proposal will transform the key gateway into the city improving safety, connectivity and environmental sustainability for both residents and visitors. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. And finally, Rachel Allwood.
Sorry. Good afternoon, councillors. I'm Dan Dowra's Planning Director, and I want to briefly talk about affordable housing. It was always our intention to deliver 20%. However, a lot has changed since we bought the site, including exponential increases in construction costs since we submitted our application nearly 2 years ago. The Council's own independent viability review has concluded our development can only deliver a maximum of 10% affordable homes, albeit at local housing allowance rents. We have tried, but we have been unable to secure any further grant funding to increase that 10%. But we have agreed to a review so that if the viability improves, we will increase the level of affordable homes. I fully appreciate that affordable housing is a key priority, but cannot overstate how difficult it has been to satisfy all the demands placed on this scheme at a time when viability has never been so challenging. The proposal before you is viable and will deliver 435 much-needed new homes and make an important contribution to affordable housing within the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That brings us to the conclusion of the public forum. We're now going to have a presentation by Ben, but also very grateful that Jim has been able to make it. Jim is our specialist on developers' contributions and viability assessments. So where there are technical questions, I know Councillor got one or two concerns, have had historically one or two concerns. Jim will be able to answer those. But over to you, Ben, I think.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Due to a slight technical issue with my computer, Jim will be managing the slides for me today. So this application is for the redevelopment of the former Peugeot garage on Clarence Road with a mixed-use residential-led scheme comprising 435 dwellings with amenity space and 773 square metres of flexible commercial space at ground floor level. Shown on the plans as 4 separate units, along with new public realm, landscaping and amenity spaces. The development would be on either side of Chasterton Street, with Block A following Clarence Road around the Bath Road roundabout and along Temple Gate, and Block B on the other side of Chasterton Street, fronting Clarence Road. So just some site photos here showing the existing situation where you've got the 3-storey former Peugeot showroom and then the single-storey garage workshop, and across the street there was an open car park where new vehicles and used cars were stored. And then the next slide just shows the angle. So the top one is just from the opposite side of the street, and then the one in the bottom right is from the bottom of Station Approach as you're leaving Temple Mead Station. So the reason for this one coming to committee, the application is here due to its size and prominent location within the city. There have been very few public objections, in fact only 5, which includes the Bristol Civic Society's comments, and no objections from any consultees. The scheme in its revised form proposes 435 residential units of 1 to 3 bedrooms in size, and the breakdown is set out in the officer's report to committee. 7% of the dwellings would be wheelchair accessible, which is more than 3 times the minimum requirement, and 43 units would be affordable. It should be noted that this has been reduced by 1 in order to accommodate Section 106 contributions towards the Bristol Avon flood strategy and public transport improvements. So in total, over £403,000 of Section 106 contributions have been agreed, and the breakdown is set out on the slide here. So the key issues we felt were land use, design, heritage, amenity for future occupiers, flood risk and affordable housing. In land use terms, the site forms part of the Temple Quarter development site allocation for a mixed use scheme and contributes towards the residential and commercial space requirements for the wider site. In addition, it would create new public realm, widened pavements and a segregated cycle lane to be adopted by the council. As such, the scheme is considered policy compliant in land use terms. In terms of design and heritage, the applicant has worked proactively with our urban design officers to revise the scheme, and this iteration that comes before you, the design and conservation officers are satisfied with. The revisions include reducing the height of the taller element of the scheme from 20 to 15 stories, improvement to the elevation treatments in terms of the design detail and materials. The latest iteration of the scheme, as I said, is now considered to be acceptable. In terms of amenity provision, all dwellings meet the National Described Space Standards. 56% will have private balconies or terraces, and a further 33% will have Juliet balconies. The scheme now provides a range of outdoor amenity spaces, both at ground floor or street level, including a pocket park and a children's play area, and we've negotiated in 2 additional amenity spaces on the rooftop, so there'll be 4 different rooftop amenity spaces. The additional measures have been added to the scheme to improve the environment at the lower level. We had raised concerns about wind and tunnelling effect, and the applicant has revised the plans, adding windbreakers and various different treatments, and provided an updated wind tunnelling assessment, which we are satisfied with and are happy that those spaces would provide good quality amenity space, and on days or times when it wouldn't, they have alternative provision within the site. With regard to flood risk, Block A is predominantly in zones 1 and 2, and Block B is located in flood zone 3. The proposal initially included a bridge over Chatterton Street between the 2 blocks to provide emergency access and egress in an extreme flood event that could be possible within the later lifetime of the development. Following objections from the Environment Agency and discussions with our flood risk officers, the proposal has been revised. The bridge has now been removed on the basis of the city flood defences, and the scheme will be contributing towards them. It's also had to change 3 duplex apartments in Block B to flats, so that there's space so that none of the residential accommodation is below the maximum potential flood level. Upon revision, the Environment Agency has withdrawn its application, and the flood risk team are satisfied that the scheme is safe up to 2040, by which time city flood defences would be in place to protect the development throughout its lifetime. All living accommodation, as I said, is above flood levels, and all residents would have access to high levels in an extreme flood emergency. Officers are satisfied that the scheme meets the requirements of the sequential and exception tests and offers significant public benefits in the form of 435 dwellings, improved public transport and public realm. With regards to affordable housing, 9.9% or 43 units of affordable housing is to be provided, and that's to be rented at no more than the local housing allowance maximums. And viability reviews to see if additional affordable housing can be provided will take place as the development progresses. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are no objections from any of the consultees on this application. Following the design revisions, Urban Design, Conservation and Historic England are all satisfied. Transport, development management, flood risk, nature conservation, air quality, sustainability and pollution control are all satisfied subject to conditions which we have included. And a contribution for a new fire hydrant that was requested by Avon Fire and Rescue is also secured by Section 106 contribution. So here you can see the proposed ground level layout. As you can see, there is commercial use along the frontage of Temple Gate and Bath Road roundabout, and workspace or further commercial use as it turns onto Clarence Road, and then amenity space for future occupants. And then on Block B, it's ancillary or marked as riser space to ensure that the floor level is safe in a flood event. On the next slide, you can see some of the proposed landscaping for the development. It demonstrates the new public realm, widened pavement, new segregated cycle lane, and you can see, it's hard to tell. If I can use the mouse for a second, let me see if I can get the cursor up to that screen. So, may I? Yeah. Thank you. So there will be a new public realm route running through here, an arrival space here, drop-off points here and here, and then you've got the wheelchair accessible blue badge parking as the only parking for the scheme. The next slide shows the rooftop treatment. So again, you can see we've got large rooftop amenity spaces here, green roof, PV panels, another amenity space here and another one here, and then another one over here, and then you've got living roofs with PV panels. So the proposed floor plans, this one just shows a proposed floor plan for Block A, and you can see there that there is a wide variety of tenures there in terms of their size, from 1 bedroom up to 3 on each level, so it's not kind of separated. And then the next slide will show Block B, which again has a number there, and there are 3 accessible units per floor. The next slide just shows the elevation. So we've got the proposed Temple Gate elevation. That's the one you see as you're coming out of the station, down station approach. The next one shows the view on Chatterton Street. So there's currently a pedestrianised access that runs between the Temple Gate house and the garage. If you walk down there, this would be the view. So that's the closest you'd be to the tallest element of the site. The next one shows the view along Bath Road roundabout onto Clarence Road. And then the next slide shows the drop down in height to Block B and how it fits in with the existing buildings beyond that. So finally, we've got the elevation treatment. So we've negotiated into the scheme that, as you can see on the left, it'll be natural stone with actual brick rather than brick cladding running up the majority of the buildings, right up to the higher floors, when the treatment will change to create that different bottom, middle and top on taller buildings. The design team have been out, we've felt the materials, we've seen them in sunlight, in shade, wet and dry, and we're satisfied that the materials are of a suitable quality for a scheme of this location. And then we've got some TVI imagery so you can see how it would look. These views again from station approach, and then from across the road on the other side of Redcliff Way, and then as you're approaching Bath Road at the top, and then as you get to Bath Road roundabout at the bottom. So in conclusion, the officers recommend the application be approved. It would deliver 435 new dwellings, 43 of which would be affordable. We'd secure £403,500 in Section 106 contributions, which would include £250,000 for transport infrastructure improvements, £150,000 towards Bristol Avon flood strategy, widened pavement and segregated cycle route along the Bath roundabout, or Bath Road roundabout, and Temple Gate frontage, which would then be adopted by the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Jim, I wonder if you could just try and give us a simple overview of the contributions that I know, not a training session perhaps, but a simple overview of the contributions we're requesting from the developer and the viability assessment and how that's working together in the recommendation that officers are making to us today.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Alexander. So, the headline figures, I suppose, Ben's already mentioned, are 43 affordable dwellings. The overall level of developer contribution from this scheme, if you were to put a financial value on it, is around about £10.8 million. So that comprises of £6.7 million of affordable housing, that's the 43 affordable housing units, £3.7 million of SIL, and as Ben's mentioned, just over £400,000 of Section 106 monies. So overall financial value of community benefits, in effect, is £10.8 million. In simple terms, the council's view of the scheme viability, which, as you'll realise from your papers, is not quite the same as the developer's view. We're not in total agreement with them. The council's view is that the scheme, the end-use scheme, has a value of £128 million. The cost of delivering the scheme, including the build costs, the purchase of the land in the first place, financing costs, professional fees, etc., is £116 million, and the return to the developer is £12 million. £12 million equates to about 10% on cost, or 9.4% on value. So put very simply, if you were developing and designing a project that cost you £1.16, then you'd be selling it for £1.28. So that's your, in a really simple, picking it down to base level terms, it's a profit of about 10%, which is relatively low. We would not find it unusual to see a build to rent scheme with profit levels nearer 12 or 13%. So this is a little bit lower than we'd expect to see, but that's that's the view of our consultant. And on that basis, they are happy that it can provide the 43 affordable dwellings. One of the key issues is around the level at which the affordable dwellings are to be provided. So there are, within the build-to-rent sector, government guidance suggests that a reasonable reduction in the level of rent for affordable properties should be 20%. So that would mean, in effect, that instead of paying, I don't know, £100 rent a week, the person would be paying £80 rent a week. Well, actually, that's not much use to us because the vast majority of our housing need is from people who can only afford to pay up to the maximum local housing allowance. And that's about, in my hypothetical example of either £100 or £80 rent per week, that's about £48 a week. So the 43 affordable dwellings that we've secured is at that local housing allowance maximum. So it's capped quite low at that amount. The result of that is you get less affordable housing than you would do if you were allowing the affordable housing to be rented out at only a 20% discount. Because obviously if the developer's only getting £48 a week rent instead of £80 a week rent, it impacts on viability. But the view of certainly the senior officers in the housing team, and I believe the leader of the council, is that actually we would much rather have a lower level of affordable housing that actually delivers against our need rather than a higher level. In this case, it would be around about 80 odd units. That doesn't really deal with the need that the city has. Dandara have said that they would be prepared to provide about 80 odd units at a 20% discount, but the council's view, or certainly the senior officers in housing's view, is they would much rather have fewer units at a larger discount because that deals with our need. One of the questions we're often asked on build-to-rent schemes is, yes, but will the residents of the affordable units get access to all the facilities that the residents of the open market units will get access to? And I understand from Ben and his discussions with the applicant that is the case. So anyone who's in an affordable unit will get access to exactly the same facilities as anybody who lives in an open market, an open market unit. I can pick up any other questions, Councillor Alexander, that people might have as we go along, but does that do for the moment?
That was an excellent summary and really clear, actually. So thank you very much, Jim. It is certainly question time. I'm just about to open it and I shall ask councillors to put their hands up if they have a question. Lisa, Councillor Durston, do you have a question? And not Lisa, Councillor Stone.
I thought you were taking the mic on there, but anyway. Thanks very much. Yeah, just a quick question. So I know you've just said that obviously they have all the rights, the amenities of these buildings. How about making sure that they are in suitable or maybe randomly picked? Those 43 are randomly picked, so they don't get put at the bottom with the least light, for example. How about that?
The way we tend to work things with build-to-rent schemes, and the best example we've actually got at the moment is a scheme called Boxmakers Yard up in Temple Quay North on Avon Street, is that the location of the units can be transient. In fact, they can move around the building because with build-to-rent units, we haven't got a housing association involved. There is no housing association. In effect, the operator, Dandara, is acting as its own housing association. So if, for example, there are, and the intention would be that the affordable units would be spread around the development. But if, for example, I don't know, a tenant in one of the affordable units in a one-bed moved out, but there was also an empty two-bed unit at that moment in time, and there was a need for a two-bed unit to be used by an affordable occupant, they can move. They don't have to stay as the same unit all the time. So it's quite a different concept to a block that's operated by a social housing provider.
Is that okay? Is an answer helpful, Lisa? Yeah, okay. Councillor Poultney?
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, how do we deal with that in terms of the viability assessment? In terms of the value gained or lost if you're potentially moving between three-bedroom affordable units and one-bedroom affordable units? How's that calculated?
We don't. And the reason, I'll explain why we don't. I thought it was easier to give you the straight answer first. Any viability reviews that are done, there's two occasions where we're potentially looking to do a viability review. Firstly, if the development hasn't started within 18 months of a planning consent being granted. And we have that early stage review, because really we want them to get on with it. You know, all developers, having got a consent, we want them to get on with it. So it's a kind of a carrot and stick thing, really. You get on with it quickly, we won't ask for an early stage review. The late stage review is done before first occupation. So the Section 106 agreement will identify indicatively the types of units that will be initially available for people through the build-to-rent process. Sorry, through the discounted market, the discounted rent process. Planning practice guidance and the RICS guidance on development viability doesn't allow you to do reviews once a development's complete or after a development's complete, in effect. So the latest we can do a review is prior to the first occupation. So that will be based on the initial units that will be made available, which will be specified in the Section 106 agreement. But moving forward, 4, 5, 6 years after development started, as I say, the circumstances that I mentioned just now could occur, but that won't be considered in any sort of viability. So the last time we will look at viability is when everything is ready and just about to be occupied.
So in which case, what are our assumptions about which of the units going in will be in terms of making that viability assessment?
So the way that the viability is worked on is a square footage. So we apply a value per square foot, if that makes any sense, because the unit at this point in time, at this early point in time, you don't necessarily know exactly which units are going to be which. So we know that the average value per square foot is X, for example, and then so that an open market unit, let's use my hypothetical example, we might put an open market unit in at £100 a square foot and a affordable unit in at £48 a square foot. So you're just working on square footage rather than individual units and individual unit sizes and types. It enables you to capture the value of the total amount of development that is going to be available to rent. Does that make sense? It doesn't.
Still thinking about
logically, it makes sense. But I suppose, but for clarity, if in other words, at the point of occupation, those are 26 3-bed units and 17 2-bed units, that would be substantially less viable, should we say, for the applicant than if it was 43 one-bedroom units. But either outcome is possible.
Hypothetically, that is possible, but ultimately what we'll have is a scenario where at the point of occupation, the developer will be required to provide 43 units for affordable tenants, and those 43 units will comprise, a capped amount of floor space, if that makes any sense. That would be the way you deal with that. So we couldn't turn around and say, actually, we'll have all your 3-bed and all your 2-bed units, because that would be far in excess of the level of floor space. So it's about percentages and how you work the floor space through.
Thank you. Apologies. And just final question on the basis of, in this area, from me at least. In terms of the viability of the affordables, I'm trying to frame this in light of what's just been said. Apologies, you'll have to come back to me. Give me a second.
Perhaps we could have a training session actually at some time, because I'm reluctant to go into too much of the background methodology as we're dealing with a specific application. But it is complex, I recognise that. Councillor Durston, I think, is next, and then Councillor Peat.
Thank you. Given that the number of affordable homes has gone down from 44 to 43 as a result of the additional Section 106 money, how much has the extra infrastructure that's been included in this application come at a cost in terms of more affordable housing?
Oh, yeah, sorry, no, I mean, affordable housing policies in the local plan are one of the only types of policy within a local plan that contain flex. So an affordable housing policy may say development to provide 30% affordable housing subject to viability. So that could mean anywhere between 0% and 30% is acceptable. And if there are things that are physical things that are absolutely essential to make the development acceptable in planning terms, for example, some highway works or whatever it happens to be, then they go into the viability analysis and they will impact potentially on the level of affordable housing that can be secured. So it may well be the case in certain circumstances that this is a development that has, I don't know, development of a listed building, for example, or a development that has particular architectural requirements due to it being in a certain location. It may be that there are additional costs in there, in the build or in the infrastructure needed, that can impact on the amount of affordable housing that's provided. So yes is the short answer. The level of infrastructure provided can result in the affordable housing amount flexing usually down. Yeah.
So does that mean that there, in some cases, a choice has to be made between, for example, cycle infrastructure, improved cycle infrastructure, or affordable housing?
We should not, I use the words carefully, well, not really carefully, I'll use them with a slight sort of smirk. We should not be asking for things through Section 106 that could not be justified. So it's long gone the time when we could have a great big shopping list of nice to haves, because planning obligations are now put on a statutory and a legal footing, and to ask for any planning obligation, it has to comply with lawful tests. So there may be decisions where we have to acknowledge that a development is not fully viable with all the things that we need, but generally, if our transport colleagues require something, they have to justify internally, in effect, to our development management, our planning colleagues, that it is necessary, because a nice to have it just isn't allowable anymore. That's really why the previous government brought in the community infrastructure levy, to provide a levy that enables councils to provide the types of infrastructure that they want to support their growth.
Sorry, just one more quick question. Thank you. In terms of the review that's been committed to of the viability of the possibility of more affordable housing, what processes will be in place to make sure that that actually occurs and any kind of actions are followed up on from that?
So the first thing to say is viability reviews are always upwards only, so that the 10% affordable housing is guaranteed in effect if this development comes forward. The viability reviews are to see if additional can be provided. The requirement for viability reviews is set out in the Section 106 agreement, so it's an obligation that the developer has to comply with. So the first one is, a review if they haven't started within 18 months. Well, we'll know if they've started within 18 months because they'll have lawfully had to send us information about the community infrastructure levy that sets a commencement date. So if they haven't started, we will know. And then inevitably, with all these things, we know when they're going to be occupying, because it's, well, particularly on development this size, it's going to be one of the largest developments in the city if it goes ahead. We will know when it's going to be occupied, so we'll be able to, ensure that the viability review that's needed is done at that point in time. So it's lawfully set out in the Section 106 agreement, I think, is the answer to your question.
Is that all right, Lisa? Okay, we will organise that training session because it is genuinely complex. Councillor Pete.
Hi, so I've got two questions. The first is, if we are to approve this, are we able to put a condition on how many of the affordable housing as like a minimum that needs to be, for example, a 3-bedroom? So that way it's not just the affordable housing is moved to be for example, just all 1-bedrooms. We can safeguard some 3-bedrooms, for example. Are we able to do that?
You could potentially do that, but you'd have to think, do we really want to do that? Because if further down the line, the need is not necessarily for those 3-bedroom units. The beauty, in effect, of build to rent is that you have the flexibility to change units from being open market to affordable rent, and if you have that, if you condition things too tightly, you don't necessarily have that flexibility. So I wouldn't. My professional view is that I wouldn't advise it, but you potentially could. But you'd need to make sure that what you weren't doing is conditioning such that you ask for all the 3 and all the 2-bed units, for example, because that would adversely impact on viability and take it above the floor space threshold.
Yeah, I suppose we would always want to protect that certain amount of flexibility, but just to make sure that there is some that is safeguarded as has affordable housing. My second question is, and this is more about just confirming whether or not I've interpreted the answer to Councillor Durston's question right. So essentially, because of the amount that was invested into the infrastructure, the amount of affordable housing has been decreased that can be provided. Just simple yes or no to that.
Yep.
Great. So what is to stop developers from just putting more money into infrastructure so that they don't have to provide as much affordable housing?
Well, the infrastructure that the developer's providing its own on-site infrastructure, like the cycle path and the permeability that Ben was referring to. But the infrastructure, and that's dealt with in the build cost of the development. In effect, that's what they're doing on their site to make a decent quality development. The monies that are coming through Section 106 are monies that come to us to deliver infrastructure that we have said is required. So if we haven't said, if we had not identified any transport mitigations that were needed, then the developer wouldn't be paying us £250,000 towards transport mitigations, and that would be going into additional affordable housing. But there are £250,000 worth of requirements to make the development safe in planning and transport terms. So that's why that is required. It's not just a case of a developer going, oh, I'm going to, put a shiny copper and zinc and gold claddle around my building just so I can not provide any affordable housing. I'll put the cost in elsewhere.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that.
Thank you. Councillor Pulteney's remembered his third question.
I did, thank you, Chair. No, it was just to sort of follow up on that point, really, I think. But it was just in respect of, it's great to see that we can trigger a preoccupation review of the viability as it's ongoing. But would I be right in thinking that the developer can also do such, as in could the number of affordable houses go down as well as up at any point during the construction? And I suppose my corollary to that would be, at that point, surely the expense has already been borne by the developer. As in, if the council turns around and says, oh, cost of building supplies has come down, we need more affordable, and the developer says, well, we've already spent the money and we spent more, what's to stop that from happening?
Your analysis is absolutely right, actually, Councillor Pulteney. In years gone by, it was possible for developers to subsequently negotiate affordable housing down as they were going through their development process. And the previous government put a stop to that in 2016, 2017. And now national planning practice guidance basically says that viability reviews are to be upwards only. So the amount you secure at the point at which you grant a planning permission is the base minimum, and any review will only result in additional affordable housing. That said, I have to warn you, and the same would apply to any development in front of this committee, there is nothing stopping this developer or any other developer at any time putting in a new application for a slightly different scheme, and we go through the whole process all over again. That's just allowable in planning. We can't control that, and that's not a Dandara specific thing. That will be anybody doing development in the city can always put in a revised application.
Thank you. I see no more hands for questions, so I think we'll move to the discussion. Would anyone like to make a point in the discussion? Well, you can, yes, but your hand wasn't up, sorry, unless it was up secretly. Okay, yes, you can. And I'll assume that's the last one, unless someone else's hand is up. You put your hand up now, Paula. Wasn't up before, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. We don't need to extend the question time, but if you want to ask a question, could you please put your hand up? So it's Councillor Stone now, Councillor O'Rourke afterwards.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring our attention to, I suppose in the way, I'm looking at the scheme itself. I just want to bring our attention to the historic value around the scheme. So let's look at all the historic value around it. So Temple Meads, the Bristol next to building, St Mary Redcliff. It's a question that we need to bring up. We need to make sure. I just want to make sure, is there anything that we can do? I mean, we brought it up. There's also a view of the before and after from the Bath Road, where we're not seeing the spiral for St Mary Redcliff. Now, I know that this is something that I think is dear to a lot of people's hearts in Bristol. So I think it isn't, the scheme doesn't seem to be, I don't know, compassionate to that view. Is there any way that it can be tweaked? I don't know, can it?
Thank you. Well, it's something that has been discussed and Historic England have commented on, and for any scheme on this site, given it's a city centre site, it's a prime development site, it's a site allocated for development, any building taller than what's there at the moment is going to have an impact on that particular view of St Mary Redcliffe Spire. It was raised. It's one of the reasons, it's one of the reasons that the height of the block was brought down at an early stage, but it has been assessed by Historic England, and the vast majority of views on that side of the city looking back will still see St Mary Redcliffe. It's just that one particular view where it's predominantly gone, but again, if you go back to the higher view, it's back. So it's a transient view as you come down Bath Road because you're moving in that direction, and you will still see St Mary Redcliffe until you're almost at the roundabout. So it's not completely lost. And Historic England were very clear that it would be considered a minor harm, but given the public benefits of the scheme, it's one we're prepared to accept. And as I say, the majority of the views are protected. Reducing the height from 20 to 15 stories of the largest point means that the view of St Mary Redcliffe's across the harbour side is completely protected. So it's something we've been sensitive to throughout the progress of this application. In the 2 years it's been in, and we've been negotiating and working with developers to improve it, it's something that we have consistently looked at. So at this point, with the scheme we have before us, we're satisfied that the vast majority of views are protected, and that there are views along Bath Road of St Mary Redcliffe as you approach the site. So it's not completely lost. It's just that one position. If you're standing there, you won't see St Mary Redcliffe. If you're 30 or 40 feet away and you're still walking in that direction, you will still see it.
So you can move. Because we've already lost a lot of affordable housing in order to retain a lot of views of St Mary Redcliffe from a lot of different places. It's very fair and quite right to bring it up as well if it was something. Paula, Councillor O'Rourke, I believe this is the last question.
Well, I hope I'm not
Councillor Pulteney, that'd be yes, all right. Councillor Pulteney after Councillor O'Rourke.
I think I'm probably going to open myself to ridicule with this question, especially with the preamble, because it relates to my summer holiday reading. I read a murder mystery book on my holidays, and it was based on the fact that a developer had got approval to build on a site that was contaminated, and they were supposed to cleanse it, and it was never checked and it was never cleansed, and then people started dying. And I see that this is a contaminated site. It's probably contaminated. And it did dawn on me, do we as a council, what are our checks and balances on that?
So we have pre-commencement conditions for that exact reason. So further investigation of the site will be done to work out exactly what the contamination is. That needs to be reviewed by our land contamination officer. That will set out what remediation is required to make the site safe from contamination, and that will then be agreed and approved by our land contamination officer. And then the developer will need to go and do that remediation work and show us that that has been done, and that's all secured by condition. So yeah, absolutely, it is a contaminated site. We don't know exactly what the levels of contamination are. That will be set out in the next pre-commencement condition. It's unlikely to be too severe. It's a former garage. It's not like it's a former chemical plant or something. So it shouldn't be. And we're not expecting it to be too arduous, but they will need to demonstrate that any remediation required has been done successfully prior to commencement of development. So we'll need to know what there is, what the remediation required is, and how that's going to be done before it can be done.
And actually, with all the talk about the review just before commencement, could that affect the viability?
No, because sorry, Councillor. No, because as I said, the viability reviews, providing that consent is granted and it is built out, viability reviews are upwards only. Once the planning consent's been granted, the risk to the developer is considered to be crystallised, and they're accepting that risk. So viability reviews would only be upward.
Thank you. Councillor Stone, Councillor Pulteney, please can we focus on this particular application, not on areas of training in the wider issues in planning, please. Lisa, is that something that you're about this particular application?
I was going to talk about the single aspect. Okay, so there's a huge percentage of a single aspect in this development. I think it's 43%, which is single aspect. And I know in our STB, SP, the Urban Living Standards, we have to try and maximise where opportunity is to maximise as much dual aspect as we possibly can. This comes up quite regularly with most of our builds actually across the city, where developers are trying to create as much apartment, and I don't blame them, as much apartments and units as they possibly can. But in doing so, they really do not actually fulfil that dual aspect situation in which they should do. Could you explain why that was?
It's actually one of the reasons that we have been working for so long on this application to make design improvements. The number of dual aspect units has been improved significantly from where we were at prior to this, through setting certain facades back to allow secondary windows, and then from the height variations to increase dual aspect further up. It is a big scheme. We're looking at almost a hyper-density scheme in the city centre that brings forward the housing that we need. So in order to do that, you need the height and you need the kind of the cores of the building. So it would, in order to have all of the units as dual aspects, you'd effectively have to have a stair core every 4 units, which is completely unviable. So we have to get the best possible design and livability that we can within a scheme. And we've worked very hard with the developer, and they have listened to us. The key things that we've managed to improve on the scheme are a reduction in the number of one-bed, one-person units, increasing the number of units for smaller families, sort of the 2-bed, 2 persons, and improve the variation. So there's a number of things that we've done there. We've also managed to significantly increase the number of units that have balconies to well over 50%. So that's a big improvement as well. So even where you've got some that are single aspect, they have the ability to go out onto a balcony, and then effectively you've got fresh air and views on 3 sides. So yes, the unit itself is single aspect, and I understand in terms of natural ventilation and things like that, it's not ideal. But given the improvements that we've got, we're satisfied that this development does offer a good quality of accommodation for the people that will occupy it. And I don't think we'd be able to realistically improve the numbers from where we've got to. I think it's 89% have either Juliet or full balconies on this development now. So it's come a long way over 2 years, and a lot of work's gone into it to really maximise the livability, particularly with amenity space, having dual aspect, and private amenity space and balconies.
Just to come back on that, so that also includes, because obviously in the sunlight study that's been completed, there are still some minor upsets where that's concerned. It's not a full report, is it? I mean, not every single unit will get the maximum amount of sunlight they should be getting.
I think, without going right the way into the report again, that the units all get the level that's required. There are some rooms where it drops down as you go to the back, but those are kitchen living areas where you would expect natural artificial lighting in kitchens anyway. So the rooms have been redesigned, or the units have been redesigned and reconfigured to maximise the amount of sunlight in those particular units, so that it's the living area that gets the sunlight and the kitchens are set back. So it's something we do see quite regularly. And again, on a scheme of this size, it's all about trying to get the best that we possibly can. And again, with this scheme, I genuinely believe that we've pushed it as far as we can to get the best possible design and livability for the units.
Councillor Pulteney.
Thank you. No, that very neatly segues on, Chair. Thanks. It was more of a reassurance around the sequencing of the adaptations made in light of the response to the consultations. It was just to confirm, obviously, the additions of the balconies is quite significant change, but to enable the residents to enjoy the amenity of having sunlight. Was the sustainability of the building then reassessed in light of the need to have, I would imagine, large doors open onto Juliet balconies? Did that reassessment happen?
Not to that extent, but then you can never control how often someone's going to keep a window open or not, regardless if it's a window or a balcony. In terms of sustainability, the development will be connected to the district heat network. So and then there's additional PV on the roofing as well. So in terms of sustainability, we're quite satisfied that the materials being used, the level of sustainability, the work that's gone into making the building sustainable, and the energy usage is very good on this development. So no, I don't think we've kind of reassessed it on the basis of having all of the balcony doors open. But I don't think that's something we'd be able to effectively calculate anyway.
Okay, we now move to the discussion. So if anyone would like to open that discussion, you don't need to make comments if you don't want, but I would ask that if you do wish to make comments, you keep them as succinct as possible, please. Hand up if anyone would like to speak. Councillor O'Rourke.
It's always a bit difficult, isn't it? You know, nothing's perfect. It's a very important site. You know, like some people who've asked some questions here today, I do have some concerns about livability. You know, the single aspect things and Juliet balconies that you can't get out onto, and the side of the road where you have to keep your windows closed because of the air pollution. And also, you know, this is what I would consider to be a landmark building spot, especially when, you know, when you're reading the report that when the new entrances to Temple Meads are put in place, this will be what people see. So you really want it to be something that people are going to look at and go, wow, I really love it. So I've spent actually a lot of the time looking at the images again and going back to the information that's in the report about the brickwork and the hand-cut bricks and the soldiers format to give the variation. And I like the elements of shadow that have been brought into it. And I like the fresh work. And I like the carriageway for the activated ground source. And in many ways, you know, I was looking at the heritage and you think about where does this fit into the place? And I always worry about myself wanting to make things very pastiche-y and, you know, like a Barbie house. And I looked at the towers from the Brunel building and you think, why didn't they stick a few turrets on it? But of course that would look ridiculous. And then I persuaded myself that actually the monolithic nature of it does in a way reference back to the bonded warehouses and part of our iteration of our history. So, you know, I see that it's a monolithic, and I sort of wish that the flat line of the roof was slightly different. But you know, 435 houses, and homes, and I was very impressed by the explanation that Jim was able to give us about the affordable housing, because that was obviously a concern. But once it had been explained in the sense that fewer properties, but to give greater benefit to our Bristolians, then I found that's acceptable. So, yeah, despite the fact that I'm not going to get my Barbie turrets, I think it's good. It's nice. It's sustainable. Very sustainable. It's homes that we need. I will be voting to approve this.
Thank you, Councillor Pete, and I'm ready to move to the vote at any point if no further hands go up.
I quite like it quite a lot. I think a lot of thought has been put into it. I think my only real reservations, I mean, there are parts such as, you know, it being so central, there is going to be a certain amount of noise pollution and air pollution and stuff, but I think that's unavoidable. But I think my only reservations are around protecting those affordable housings. So I want to revisit whether or not we can put a condition on it that say we just protect, you know, 3 of the 3 bedrooms or something like that for affordable housing. Is that something we can do?
It's not something that our housing officers have asked for, is it?
I mean, I'm sort of half talking to Jonathan across you here, so I do apologise. I mean, it potentially would be possible to have a condition that required that the affordable housing units comprised a mix and maybe have, at least one or two or whatever, 1, 2 and 3 beds, such that it's not all one beds, it's not two.
That's literally all I'm asking for.
But I don't think
you
you want a condition that says it must be X number of these units and Y number of those units. You maybe want to have a minimum or maximum type condition that may be possible. What I would suggest is, what would I suggest? I would suggest that if members were minded to approve on that basis, that they do so and delegate responsibility to officers to go back and work with the affordable housing team and the applicant to come up with a condition that works. Does that make sense?
If members are minded to do that, that will be an amendment to the officer's recommendation. I'll follow the full process. But thank you for your comment. Anybody else before Councillor Gooch?
Yes, thank you. I'm quite impressed by the development and the developer as well. And I have to say, I think it does look good. My concerns, I'd agree, it would be good if we could have a mix that of housing in the affordable, which maybe could be something that we actually look at, generally as something that we want to put into the council, which is based, say, on what people are looking for on home choice, maybe, so that we can actually basically say, look, we've got this number of people who are looking for 3-bedroom, this number of people, what proportions people are looking for, and then we could ask for those proportions to be in the affordable housing. So it's more of a changing our housing policy, ask about it, but I think that's a good idea if it's something that we can bring into our asks. Yes, I also agree it's a shame to lose that view of the church. I can't remember we were talking about it with someone who was saying that somewhere in London they've got various protected views of St Paul's all over the city where you can't put a building in the way. But it is very, very difficult when it's a city centre, and we do need to put something in there.
And it isn't St Paul's, with the greatest respect to Mary Redcliff.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they've done a very good job, to be honest. I think it looks really good. Again, because of the enclosed, nature of the inside, there are some bits, I think, lower down that won't get much sunlight, and that also will affect the courtyard area. I think when we had the review, we sort of looked at the fact that by the time you get to the equinoxes at both ends of the year, you're getting quite down to limited amounts of sunlight in the courtyard. And one of my worries about that is that it would become an unpleasant space down in the courtyard, where, with trees dying and generally litter being left, and it becoming unpleasant and hostile, which is obviously something that I would like to make sure through the process we can stop that from happening and make sure that it remains a nice, welcoming space for people who live there to actually enjoy.
I think it would be in the interest of the company to make sure that it remains that. So that's possibly a good thing about this particular product, is there's an ongoing relationship with the company. But yeah. Any further comments before we move to the vote? Councillor Pulteney, I'm very sorry. I had your name down, I forgot you.
That's all right, thank you, Chair. So two things for me in this one, really. And the first relates to something Councillor Stone raised earlier in terms of the submission from Historic England. I just felt the need to go back and reread it. But obviously we're required to make this decision based on planning grounds and to give things the weight that policy requires, both national and local. And I do just want to flag that it looks to me as though the submission, the statement from Historic England, does make it very, very clear that it's not the level of harm to the asset that would be caused that should inform our decision as much as the significance of the heritage asset itself. And to that, they assign the greatest level of value that they can. And then, again, respectfully, I appreciate it began as an objection, but the way that statement reads is, if your authority is convinced that the quantum of development proposed for the site is appropriate for the location, We're content for the minor harm we've identified to be balanced against any wider public benefit. And I do think it's important in that context to acknowledge I personally think I will be voting for this on the basis of the affordable provision. And I'm convinced by the officer, and I wholeheartedly concur with the authority's approach, that genuinely affordable and fewer is better than actually not very affordable, but more, if it's about meeting those floor space targets. However, the remaining over 90% are not providing an ability for people to get on the property ladder. They're not providing an ability for people to get out of the rental sector at all. Rental properties of this kind can dramatically exacerbate existing wealth inequalities. And I think we also need to bear that in mind. This is building for growth. It's not building for homes that people can actually buy. And I think that's important to balance. And as I say, I'll be voting for this on the grounds of the affordable. And I'm delighted and genuinely very impressed by what the officer has managed to negotiate in this case overall, which I think is, I don't quite want to say unprecedented, but it seems close to it. But I do want to bear in mind that we are required to give great weight to the importance of those heritage assets, and that I think would have formed a basis were I minded differently in terms of the quantum for refusal. I wouldn't think badly on colleagues who did. I'll put it like that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Shall we now move to the vote then? So I am, as part of the process, I will move the officer recommendation, which is as stated in the report, to approve, but without any condition added as suggested by Councillor Peat. Do you have a problem with my statement of the process so far, Councillor Pulteney?
No, apologies, Chair. I was going to propose an amendment that I think does what Councillor Peat asks, but without some of the possible disbenefits of it as well. I just asked that be heard.
Let me explain the process, and then we can have two amendments suggested if you want. So I'm going to propose the recommendation in the report, which obviously is without any amendment. If you would therefore like to amend it, then please either do not offer to second or do not vote for that motion, because obviously it will then pass and then you will have no opportunity to amend it. So I propose now the motion as recommended by the officers in the report. Do I have a seconder for that? I do not, therefore it falls. Could I please have a suggested amended motion? Councillor Peat was first.
I would like to suggest an amendment where it is secured that there is a mix of housing sizes safeguarded for affordable housing.
And that be delegated to officers in order to decide. Could you give us, please, Jonathan, some words to check that you're happy with that? And that actually it's clear what we're putting in, that it's enforceable, something's enforceable at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. So as a suggestion, this could read, to delegate to officers to engage with the applicant regarding either a clause in the Section 106 agreement or a condition to ensure that a variety of unit sizes are available as affordable housing at all times, and also to subsequently grant subject to a planning agreement.
Okay.
That sounds adequate.
That is the amended motion. So it's the approval with that as a condition. So I'm now going to take a vote on that one. If that falls, I will then move to any other possible amendments. Okay, so could I have votes for the officer recommendation with that condition, please? Could I have a seconder? Councillor Peat proposes. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Durston. So I'll go round you one by one because I prefer, for the sake of clarity for the record. Councillor Peat, for or against? Sorry for me pointing. It's the way my brain works. For Councillor Durston.
For.
Councillor Gooch.
For.
Councillor Badruddin.
Yep.
For. Councillor Pulteney.
Against?
Against? Was Councillor Butler?
I won't trust you, Councillor Portney. Against?
Against? For Councillor Stone, sorry, I was chatting here. Against? Councillor McCowie? Against? And Councillor O'Rourke?
Oh, yeah. I want clarification that if this fall, well, it won't fall, will it? The amendment, do we get an opportunity to have another amendment?
If it falls, yes, of course.
Well, then I'll vote against, just to hear the other amendment.
Okay, and I vote for. Therefore, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that passes, is approved with the amendment. Correct. Thank you. We now move.
Sorry, I just don't feel very happy about this, if you don't mind, because I think that all moved a bit fast, and my apologies if I've done the wrong thing, but if this is not going to go to a second amendment, would you mind taking the vote again, please? Because I would like my vote to be recorded.
That was just a vote.
It's not going to go to an amendment.
It's not the final.
The amendment's passed, there'll now be a vote on the substantive.
Oh, is it going to be a vote on the substantive?
Well, that was the motion was amended, and we voted on the amended motion, which I believe is.
No.
I apologise in that case if we've got it wrong, but the procedure, as I have it at the beginning, which I agree is. Yeah, I apologise. I've got it wrong. I apologise. I've got it wrong. So what we're going to do now, I'm backtracking here, is we're going to vote on the amendment only. Okay? So, Councillor Pete's amendment. Could you vote for or against, please?
For.
For. Councillor Durston?
For.
For.
For and against. Again, I'm presuming Councillor Stone, Councillor McCowie, Councillor O'Rourke against, and I am for. Therefore, we now have the motion amended, agreed, and we're now going to vote for the motion as amended. We're all okay with that as procedure?
Unless it's possible to submit another amendment.
I don't believe it is until we voted on this.
After we voted on this, there can be no amendment. The motion, as amended, will either have fallen, it won't be capable of being amended again.
I don't believe procedurally. Yes, it is. No, I mean, we are now dealing with the amended motion as the substantive vote. I don't believe that we can go from there then to take another amendment. We're in danger of the procedure not being coherent, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, so the substantive motion as amended by Councillor Pete, would you vote for or against, Councillor Pete?
For.
For. Councillor Durston?
For.
Councillor Gooch?
For.
Councillor Badruddin?
For.
Councillor Portney?
For, Chair, and happy to second for the purposes of the minutes.
For the purposes of the minutes, Councillor Portney seconds. Councillor Stone?
Stone, I'd like to vote for the statutes. I'd also like to change my vote. I want to vote for the amendment. I assume that we could go to a second amendment to be heard. Therefore, can you change the record?
You are voting for the amendment now because it's in the page.
I thought we were voting for the whole thing now. For.
Yeah, for. Yes, I'd like to vote for the
For,
amendment.
thank you, and thank you for giving us the opportunity for clarification, because I would not have wanted to have my vote recorded as a negative.
Thank you. So we have 4 for Councillor McCowie and 4 for Councillor O'Rourke. All right, thank you. I think you can see that if we went for a second amendment after testing that one, it would be problematic, would it not? Councillor Paul, did you have any reflections on it as a matter of process? Because yeah.
Apologies, Chair. My experience, and it may be different in this, for this specific committee, is that it's always generally speaking, that you allow people to speak for and against an amendment rather than solely for it. And under those circumstances, it would have been possible to clarify what my amendment would have been and why I thought people should vote against the initial amendment. In this case, it would have been to ensure that the mix was on the basis of housing need. In other words, we wouldn't tie officers' hands to imposing a mix by default or arbitrarily, when what we might need when these units need to be delivered is one specific kind of unit. It's far better, in my experience, I'm sure yours as well, as an exec member, to have the flexibility to deliver against need as best you can with the tools we have. We now have a motion that says there must be a mix irrespective, which I think is unfortunate. But given the overall benefits of the scheme, I will happily live with it, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. And in terms of procedure, if we just point out that getting the wording in cooperation with officers is quite important. If we obviously try and cobble together, but through discussion, the wording amendment and another amendment, we could end up with something that isn't ultimately enforceable and is not actually going to get us what any of us want. Councillor Gooch?
Yes, I was just going to say, I believed it was possible to amend an amendment. We could do it through discussion. We did this in Strategy and Resources, where two parties had wanted to bring in different amendments, and we were able to discuss the wording between us freely and then agree the final wording that was going to go in the amendment.
If we wish to do that as a procedural point, I would say that we should adjourn and talk to officers. I don't believe on this particular point it would be worth an adjournment, but I would say that I think that we, as I've said before, we shouldn't make up the wording in public discussion here. We should do it with officers to make sure that it was, so that would require an adjournment, I think, in order to be fully professional. I mean, ultimately, we want an amendment to be enforceable and of value to achieve what we want to get, don't we, Councillor Pete?
I just want to make it clear for the people in the galleries that obviously this is a new committee system. We are still working out the kind of quirks of it and figuring out the procedure. I do hope that soon we will have perhaps a council-wide training on amendments. I think that's obviously needed by what's happened here today.
It's unusual for conditions perhaps to be added at this stage, but anyway, that's good. I think we have reached, roughly speaking, a shared conclusion. Thank you. That ends that particular item on the agenda, and we move to, and I will. We can review it. We can review at the next DC Leeds meeting. I'm happy to do that. The second item is in Southmead. It's the David Lloyd, Greystoke Avenue, David Lloyd Centre, Greystoke Avenue, Bristol, BS10 6AZ. And thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ben, for your support. And we've got Kana and the support of Rachel, who is our ecologist. And we've also always got Pip here for transport development management as well, should we want it. And our public forum statements, we have got, again, apologies if I get your names wrong, but first of all, S. Fowler, I don't know if that's Ms. or no. Susan Morris. Friends of Troopers Hill, not attending. I've got not attending. Ollie Collins. Thanks, Ollie. You've got 1 minute, by the way.
Hello. Good afternoon, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of David Lloyd. This planning application was submitted retrospectively in January 2024 following the installation of the paddle courts on an existing tennis court. David Lloyd have seen different approaches to the installation of paddle courts at a number of other local authorities. Following discussions with the council, David Lloyd were happy to submit this application. It's unfortunate that the installers of the courts removed some of the existing landscaping. David Lloyd have agreed with your officers to mitigate this with a new landscaping scheme and have also agreed to a condition for a tree removal and replacement plan. We've positively responded to all queries and consultee responses. This has included providing relevant technical reports and further information, including an ecology response letter to objectors, which sets out clarifications to those comments received. All of your council's officers and statutory consultees are wholly satisfied and in support of the proposals. We'd be therefore grateful for confirmation of your officers' recommendation to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ollie. Ebor? Sorry, I don't have any titles here, Mr., Mrs., Ms. or anything, so I apologise. You have 1 minute.
I'm 15 years old and I've spent hundreds of hours in Baydox Wood watching the wildlife. The paddle courts are a huge source of noise and light pollution. This noise will impair bats and owls, and light pollution has a devastating impact on insects and everything that depends on them. Even though the meadow and hedgerow aren't technically part of the designated LNR, they're still part of the wood's ecology, supporting many small birds, mammals and insects. It is also legally protected as it is bat foraging ground. Something we all need to take into account is that this decision isn't just for 2024. This is for the future of Baydox too. If permission is granted, even if in a couple of decades pollution ceases, we can never bring back that tawny owl chick that starved to death because its parents' hunting grounds are diminished, or that badger that got hit by a car because it had to go further to eat.
Thank you very much. A. West?
Thank you, Councillor. Can you hear that?
Yes.
Right. My concern here is with the possible effect upon the wildlife at Baydox Wood. This is a statutory area and local wildlife reserve. It is protected by law and designated by the local authorities. The species protected are badgers, bats, birds, and the number of habitats for these creatures is diminishing every year. Light pollution harms bats and their prey. Bats emerge around sunset to feed, and artificial light delays their feeding because the resting of bats, they do not notice nightfall. Sorry. Noise, the higher frequency usually corresponds with the frequency range of bats' own echolocation calls, and they're also highly sensitive to the loudness. This is because bats, the intensity is the nearer they are to it, the worse it gets, so to speak. The Institution of Lighting Professionals say artificial light at night is increasing at an alarming rate, the estimated to have risen over 49% in the last 30 years. This has negative impacts on bats, other wildlife, and people, as well as wasting precious energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Rowena Kenny not attending. Councillor Kaidad.
Afternoon, colleagues. Firstly, I'm requesting that you turn down this application. And I'm also quite disappointed that an organisation the size of David Lloyd and the fame it's got nationally have acted in this way, and we've got a retrospective application in. What really caused me to make the calling request in the beginning was there was no ecological assessment of the proposal. When it did come in, it completely contradicted the local knowledge of the area and of wildlife groups and friends of Baydox Woods, and it seems to completely underestimate the impact on nocturnal species that reside in the woods, and it seemed to only assess a very small radius around the court. So I may be wrong, but that was my impression of the ecology assessment that was conducted by the applicant. The other issue is the noise and light pollution that emanates from the courts. And I think the hours proposed in terms of use, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m, completely unacceptable given the light and noise pollution. If you are minded to accept this proposal, then I think in terms of conditions, we need to make sure that bat-friendly lighting is installed. The hours of operation need to be restricted. I would suggest from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. to mitigate that noise and light pollution. Amplified music or sound shouldn't be permitted on the court, because I believe that's taking place at the moment. And also, planning should not be granted into the luminance report on the impact on neighbouring properties has concluded, and any mitigation required is fully actioned. You'll see from the officer's report, they talk about doing a light report within 2 months. Well, the court's up now, so I don't see why they couldn't have done a light report and have that in front of you to see the impact. So I'm pretty disappointed with that particular condition as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dodd. Councillor Kaz-Self.
Good afternoon, councillors. As you can see from my statement, I have some concerns about this application. You've heard from somebody else about the impact on wildlife. That's item 1 I mentioned, and referred to the unique nature of Baydox Wood being 400 years old, and a unique site in the suburbs. The impact on local residents, which you've seen in statements and in public forum. In terms of the hours of operation, I have concerns like Councillor Dudd says, and I would like to say that when we look at another sports site like Henley's lawn tennis, they have a floodlight usage management plan which says they can only operate between 1,500 and 2,100 hours. So there's a precedent being set here by this David Lloyd Centre that may, if I was at Henley's, I'd be looking to extend my hours. And also, finally, Chair, just the due process and the issue to do with neighbours being very upset about the way this is being gone about by David Lloyd.
Thank you, Councillor Self. And I believe we have Frances Robertson now. Frances is going to speak first on behalf of Friends of Baydox Wood and then on behalf of herself, I believe.
Thank you. Friends of Baydox Wood is concerned about the impacts of this development on the wildlife. We have 25 years' experience of monitoring and recording the wildlife in and around Baydox Wood. Their consultant probably popped in for a couple of hours. Bristol's wildlife is in trouble. Racket sports at David Lloyd's clubs are not. David Lloyd Club has never consulted Friends of Baydox Wood. Bristol's ecological emergency recognised the value of a connected ecological network where wildlife and people can thrive. Baydox Wood is home to several nocturnal wildlife species of ecological concern. Despite knowing this, the applicant carried out no nighttime assessment of these species whatsoever. Please refuse this application, committee. If you don't want to refuse it, please defer it, at least pending a proper assessment of the nighttime wildlife. If you want to approve it, and I've just seen you can bring new conditions, please condition it to limit the hours that they can operate, not 18 hours in every 24, 365 days a year. Include the bat-friendly lighting, such as Poole Council has endorsed it. The cost differential is negligible. I checked with a sports lighting specialist. Our wildlife is in trouble, and spaces like Baydox Wood need to be better protected from these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. So I'm going to hand over now a presentation from Kana. Oh, you haven't spoken on behalf of yourself yet. Okay, please speak on behalf of yourself now.
Yes, I'm sorry I'm having to wear more than one hat today, but you know.
That's all right.
Right. I asked this planning committee to refuse this application because of the impacts on both the wildlife and on the amenity for users of Baydox Wood. David Lloyd's clubs knows it should have consulted the community and applied for planning permission in advance, but it didn't bother. Southmead is one of the most deprived areas of the city. Most local residents cannot afford the club's private members' fees. The club pretends this is a facility for the local community, but most of the local community is excluded by reason of economic deprivation. Residents can, however, use the free natural house system, which is Baydocks Wood. David Lloyd Club offers no community benefits. It runs no community events, has no discounts for the Southmead resident, runs nothing free for the Southmead community, not even a single kids' day. What local residents do have for their exercise, leisure and peaceful nature-filled recreation is Baydocks Wood. Baydocks Wood is used by walking for health groups, carers' respite walks, and other social prescribing activities aimed at improving the physical and mental health of some of the most vulnerable in our community.
Thank you. So Kana is now going to present. As I say, I'm grateful for support from environmental health, I believe, and from our ecology officers as well, where necessary, because I realise that the questions and statements do touch on those particular areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for 2 paddle tennis courts and a social area and associated flood lighting. So for those of you who don't know, paddle tennis is a racket sport played with different types of rackets to tennis. It's played on courts with sides consisting of mesh sections and glass sections against which the ball can rebound, and I'll show you some photos shortly. And usually there'd be either 2 or 4 players in a game, similar to tennis. It's worth highlighting that this is a retrospective application, and concern has been raised about the fact that the applications are retrospective, and we've heard that today. I wanted to point out that the assessment of the application does need to be made on the merits of the application rather than how the development has been carried out. So the application's been assessed against planning policy, and the fact that it is retrospective isn't a material consideration. This is the site location. The application site is an existing sports and leisure complex, as you can see on the screen. The site is shown in red, and the wider complex is within the blue circle there, more or less. Prior to the change to paddle courts, the land in question was a tennis court with an artificial grass surface, all within the confines of the sport and leisure complex. The site is accessed off Greystoke Avenue to the north, and the line in yellow on the plan here shows the route of a footpath which continues further. So that's a pedestrian route from Greystoke Avenue which runs to the west of the site and then along the southern boundary of the wider complex into Baydocks Wood. The brown area shown on this plan is the Baydocks Wood Local Nature Reserve, and within the overall green line is a designated important open space, and the yellow again shows the line of the footpath. These are existing and proposed plans showing, although existing, it's a retrospective application, but prior to the change, you can see that the proposals were tennis courts and now they are paddle tennis courts. So 2 courts have replaced 1 tennis court. Here are some photos. The first one shows photos taken from outside of the site. You can see the fence there that surrounds the sport and leisure complex, through which you can get a glimpsed view of the paddle tennis courts, and that's the footpath that runs along the boundary of the site. Here you can see what the courts look like, and in the lower photo you can see the social area. You can see the lighting columns there as well. This shows a view towards the site from neighbours off Greystoke Avenue, which is roughly delineated by the purple circle with the arrow there, shows the direction that the photo was taken towards. In terms of representations, we have had a call-in request from Councillor Dudd, who, as he set out, is concerned about the ecological impacts on Baydocks Wood, which is a local nature reserve, and the impact on wildlife of noise and light pollution has not been assessed by the applicant, and as he stated, he believes this issue should be considered by elected members should officers recommend approval. There have been 48 objections on the grounds of impacts on ecology, nature conservation, noise pollution, light pollution, transport and highways. There have also been 12 representations of support, and those numbers were prior to the committee report being published. Subsequent to that, there were 3 further objections, 1 neutral comment and 1 comment of support, and those echoed similar points to those made by others. And objectors include Friends of Baydox Wood and the Westbury on Trim Society, and we've had a neutral comment from the Bristol Tree Forum. So moving on to the key issues, these are set out in detail in the report to the committee. As you will see from this report, and as we've heard, there have been concerns raised by neighbours about the impacts of the proposals on wildlife. Following requests from officers, the applicant has undertaken an ecology report and submitted responses to issues raised by objectors, and this is detailed in the report. We've had a Lux spill plan which has been produced, and that shows how the light spills out on the surrounding area, including the footpath, and we've also received a replacement planting plan. The Council's Nature Conservation Officer is satisfied with the information and doesn't object, and we have agreed some conditions with the applicant to limit the hours that the flood lighting would be used. That's between 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday to Friday and 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Saturdays, Sundays and bank holidays. And it also within the conditions are provisions to control the lighting via sensors which comes on when the courts are in use. In terms of amenity of neighbours, we've also have concerns about the noise and light pollution on neighbours. It's important to highlight here that the noise report has been undertaken in accordance with guidelines, and we're happy with the way it's been undertaken. The report concludes that there aren't any unacceptable noise impacts. There will be some increase in noise levels. I think that's acknowledged, but it's within the tolerable limits set out within guidelines. In terms of light, the pollution will be affected by some light spill, and we also acknowledge that the floodlights will be visible from some neighbours' properties, but the light doesn't actually spill onto those properties or their gardens, and overall we don't consider it to be reasonable to refuse on the grounds of noise or light pollution, and there's no objection from the Pollution Control Officer on either noise or light pollution issues. In terms of surface water drainage, we have heard concerns raised about surface water drainage and the potential for polluted water running off the courts to potentially flow into the River Trim via an outfall pipe. Again, this issue's been set out and responded to in my committee report. The applicant has explained that there isn't any formal drainage currently across the site, but neither was there any formal drainage when the site was a tennis court. There is a sub-base under the tennis courts, which is made of porous macadam, and this hasn't changed. So the surface of the courts has changed from artificial grass, which was the tennis court surface, to coated polymer, which is the new paddle courts. There's no change to the drainage, and the water soaks into the ground, so there's no pathway for it to make its way into the outfall that's been referenced by neighbours. So any pollution to the trim we consider to be an issue that falls out of the scope of this application. In conclusion, the officer recommendation is to approve subject to some conditions which are set out in the committee report and cover measures including implementation of the planting plan that's been submitted by the applicant and the requirement for a tree report to be undertaken showing which trees have been removed and tree replacement in line with policy, and also controls over external lightings including the hours and sensors as mentioned previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Kana. Okay, when we are open for questions, please put your hand up if you'd like to. Councillor Pete.
So I'm not necessarily against this so far, but I suppose what I would like to know is floodlights are a very extreme light. Is there any way that it could be a slightly less intense light that could be used than just the floodlights? And is there room to change the hours as well? I mean, 6 a.m. is quite early if you live nearby, and obviously I want to minimise the effects on the local wildlife. So is it possible that we could also get it so it's different for the summer and the winter? It's not really necessary to have these floodlights on at 6 a.m. in the middle of August to save electricity and stuff. So is there any way that we can continue working on these parameters just slightly?
It's a good question. We have considered impacts on neighbours and impacts on wildlife quite thoroughly, and based on the information that's been presented to us and based on policy and looking at guidelines and discussing with internal consultees, officers are satisfied with what's in front of us. So we consider that our officer recommendation is to approve based on this. If members wish to take a different view, then we would have a discussion about that. Jonathan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I think really, just a general point on the conditions. I mean, if the committee considers that either amendments to the conditions or additional conditions would meet the relevant tests, then I think, there is scope to look at that. But I think, really the committee would need to be satisfied that those changes are reasonable and necessary, etc. So we could, I think, potentially look at an amendment to condition 3 with regard to the lighting to require some details to be submitted, potentially there, so we can ensure compliance with the guidance from the Bat Conservation Trust. We'd also then need to require kind of the implementation of any changes that were needed to the lighting. Also, with regard to condition 4, which controls the hours of use, again, these are as applied for and have been assessed by officers as being acceptable. But again, if the committee felt that it was necessary to amend those, there is scope to do that. And there was also reference as well to a potential additional condition regarding amplified music. I think, that would be reasonable to control that, I think, as well. So, just a few general comments there in terms of the conditions and the comments that have been made.
All right. Okay, great. Councillor Poultney is next. Councillor Poultney, Councillor Stone, Councillor O'Rourke. It's all right. We'll get round you all in the end. Councillor Gooch after that.
Do our best. Thank you, Chair. We seem to have quite a lot of conflicting information in terms of the submissions through public forum and from Friends of Baydox Wood and other local residents and interested parties throughout, and the information provided to us by the applicant. It does seem that the council has preferred the information from the applicant, and I'm just wondering, is that on the basis of a legal requirement to do so, on the weight of evidence and the balance of probability? What was the reasoning? It seems as though in every case the applicant's evidence has been preferred to any other evidence.
A couple of points here. We did ask the applicant for quite a lot of additional information and clarification, and that's set out in the report. I think it's important to flag up that we're very satisfied that the ecological reports that have been undertaken have been done in line with guidance. So that's various forms of guidance are set out in the report, and I can read out some of those if councillors would like me to do so. And there's also a general principle when undertaking ecological reports, and that's the principle of proportionality. So an area has to be assessed and surveyed in a way that's proportionate to what's been proposed.
So may I just follow up? In terms of the assessment that was done by the applicant, obviously we're looking at a retrospective planning application. How long had the development happened, as it were, before the assessment of the nature of the arboricultural assessment been done? I'm aware that vegetation was removed, trees were removed. This happened as part of it. An awful lot of the applicant's ecology report seems to rely on the fact that an awful lot wasn't present. Is it possible that the things that weren't present there because the development had already taken place?
There has been some limited tree removal, so we acknowledge that. But I think it's important to remember that prior to the change, the site was a tennis court, and now it's a paddle court. So in terms of the change that's been undertaken, I think it's the floodlighting and the change to the vegetation that's been made. In terms of an answer to your question about timeframes, I'm not actually sure when the paddle courts were first brought into use, but we can look that up. The application was made in January, so we've had it since then to give you an idea of timescales, and we were alerted to it via an enforcement case, which again is set out in my report. I'm trying to see if we've got a date on that.
Yeah, it looks like we received a complaint and we opened an enforcement case on the 14th of December 2023, and then the application was received on the 15th of January of this year.
Thanks, Jonathan. Does that answer questions on that?
Council?
All insofar as we don't know when the enforcement case should have been bought, I suppose is what I'm asking. We don't know when the paddle courts were built. We only know when someone reported the breach.
I can try and find out if it's within the applicant's statement. Hold on one second.
Since there's a representative from the applicant here, can we ask them?
I don't think we can really allow interaction between the public gallery. I'm sorry, it's just a matter of principle, really, because it opens up a potential. Councillor Stone, do you want to ask a question? Well, Councillor Portman is getting as full response as possible.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alexander. My question, no, to be honest with you, I don't play either paddle or tennis, to be honest with you, so I have no idea really what we're talking about. So, so there was a previous tennis court here, so can you just highlight the difference of noise, especially noise, as compared between paddle and tennis? I want to just know. I'm very much in favour of the ecology, to support the ecology and the local representatives for Baydox Wood. But I need to understand what the noise level is as compared from tennis to paddle, why there needed to be the floodlights put in place because you're playing paddle, not tennis. I mean, is there a different ball mechanism? Is there a different bat? What's going on here?
I will ask our pollution control officer to talk about the noise issues, but in answer to your point on lighting, there wasn't any lighting in place for the tennis courts. There is now lighting in place for the paddle tennis courts. My understanding is that that's something that the applicant has chosen to do. There are guidelines from the relevant governing body, which is the Lawn Tennis Association, on how high the lighting columns should be, and so on and so forth. So that is in place, but it's effectively it's the applicant's choice to do so, put those lighting columns in place. In terms of the differences between paddle tennis and tennis, it is played with different types of rackets and different types of balls, and there's this glass surface in place, which there isn't usually in place with a tennis court, and that was shown in some of the photos, which were on, I can move back to those if you like, on the presentation. There, you can see. So it's this section is mesh here, and then there's a glazed area. Don't know if you can. No, you probably can't see my cursor, can you? No. Okay. Well, it's part glazed and part mesh. And I'll hand over to our pollution control officer to comment on the noise issues.
I think, as Kane has said, that's the difference with the ball and the racket, that you've got a slightly different noise when you hit it's a harder racket, so a different noise when you hit the ball. There's also the perspex or glass sides of the court, so the ball can rebound off there, so you get some noise from that as well. However, the that can also act as a barrier as well. So you may have a bit of a play-off. And I think it will very much depend on the level of how good someone is at tennis, because someone very good at tennis hitting the ball really hard is probably going to be quite noisy, whereas someone being less good at paddle tennis hitting it softer is going to make a similar sort of noise. So it's a bit swings and roundabouts there.
Okay, I just want to follow up on the lighting of the new paddle courts, because obviously they've been put in. So just to clarify, there is no real need for lighting. It's just there as a nicety. It's not a necessity, yeah?
Well, I assume the lighting, like with any sports court, is for lighting so they can play when the outdoor light is so poor that they can't see. So the lighting is not going to be on from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. if that is what the condition allows. It will come on when it's dark enough so that people play. That's my understanding.
Like a football, five-a-side football or anything like that, you need lighting to play after 6 or 5 p.m.
Yeah, so why did they not just create these paddle courts inside their on an inside tennis court? Why did they have to use the outside tennis court? Why was that? I don't get it.
Well, there is an existing sports and leisure complex there, and there are a number of indoor pitches. However, it was the applicant's choice to do that, and we have to assess the application in front of us. I think it's wouldn't, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, but it's not really reasonable to assess on whether something was indoors or outdoors.
Yeah, but the problem that we have here is that the applicant didn't put in an application, so there was no consultation. It was built without consultation with the local community. So why, so they chose to build outside without consultation. It's now come forward, so we just have to accept that.
No, you don't have to accept it, but the fact that it is a retrospective application is not material. We don't have to accept it. That's why we're sitting here.
I understand that, but there was no consultation with the local community, so I think I just want to put that point forward.
Well, the application is presumably out in public, hasn't it, been for a while, albeit it was a retrospective one, and it's been done. That doesn't mean it can't be reversed should the decision be made, but the consultation was not at the stage it should have been in order to satisfy all parties. Fair comment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as this is a minor application as well, in planning terms, in terms of the scale, there is no requirement for kind of the normal kind of community consultation that we'd see on a more major application. I mean, obviously, this has been subject to the normal sort of statutory publicity, which invites comments. But, sort of the fact that this is retrospective, whilst I can appreciate the view that is regrettable in terms of kind of assessing this today, we just need to look at what's before us and assess it against policy in the normal way, really. And also, just to clarify something as well in terms of, when the work may have started, just having a look at the applicant's form, they state that was the 18th of September last year. So again, kind of just to clarify, the time frames here.
Councillor O'Rourke.
I have two questions, and they are actually about noise and about the ecological report. And although the questions have been asked, I'd still like to probe this a little bit further. On the noise point of view, I mean, have we given enough weight to the fact that where there was one tennis court without any lights to allow people to play in the evening on AstroTurf, and that's been replaced, or the application was to replace it with, or would have been, 2 paddle courts with all of the extra noise that's been highlighted to us, with hard surfaces on the ground and hard surfaces at the side, and the popularity of the fact that paddle is just quite, a thing at the moment, and also adding the lights has extended the play into the evening, and so all of that is, I think that's a lot of extra nuisance, and I wonder whether we should give that more weighting than just, what it is in the report. And about the ecological report, in many ways, I do sort of feel that it has been so undermined and devalued by being retrospective that, in essence, in a way, have the birds all flown and have the bats all gone somewhere else, so that you don't You don't, when you measure it, you can't actually now ever ascertain what the loss was, or because it's gone. So those are my two questions. Although, on a point of information, I had a meeting with the bridge master, the suspension bridge master, only yesterday, and we were talking about the lights on the bridge, and they had to do a bat survey. And she said, oh, there can't be any bats around here. And actually, there are 54,000 bats flying around under that bridge at night. Just tell you.
Great. Councillor Gooch. On the number of bats under the... I'm sorry, some are reading and other diversions. Take my mind off of process and everything. What was the question?
Contradict me if you can, but the ecological report is undermined.
Well, it was a statement, right? I mean, was the ecological...
I'll take the question about whether 2 courts and noise from the 2 courts has been assessed in noise terms. Yes, it has. So I'm just looking back at my report. So the noise assessment has been undertaken in accordance with guidelines, and it concludes that the average noise emissions of the paddle courts at all noise-sensitive receptors, which includes dwellings, are below the recommended guideline levels provided by Sport England and the World Health Organization Community Noise Guidelines. So the report also states that the maximum noise levels were calculated to be significantly lower than existing typical maximum levels. And so it's the report stating it doesn't necessarily mean that noise from the paddle courts will be inaudible, and we recognise that there are differing characteristics of noise, but the calculations and the on-site measurements and observations indicate that the maximum levels are not intrusive. And again, that's in line with, first of all, looking at the prevailing noise climate, which is like the background noise, and also its impacts on noise-sensitive receptors such as dwellings. And I might hand over to Mark if you've got anything specific to add to that. But that was just pretty much repeating from my report.
Yeah, I'd just add that the noise survey went to great pains to find out background levels without David Lloyd noise being audible. So to do a true comparison as if the paddle court was there without any other noise from David Lloyd being heard. So it was making an assessment of those 2 courts. It did a number of different assessments. First of all, because it was a retrospective application, they were able to do with people playing, without people playing, and that found that they didn't feel there was any issue. They then also did an assessment of getting some library data on noise from paddle courts and using a computer model to put that in for 2 paddle courts in this area. What level is that going to be? So, and that found, as Kane has said there, that yes, in some places the noise may be audible, but it's not going to cause any unreasonable disturbance to residents. And the last way it assessed it was doing an assessment of the maximum noise levels from the paddled court, i.e. like when the ball hits the bat or when it hits the wall, compared to other noises in the area at that time. And it was found that the maximum noise levels from the paddle court were less than the maximum noise levels which would be in that area at the time.
Hopefully that answers the question, and I'm going to hand over to our Nature Conservation Officer for an answer to the second question, which related to the fact that there has been already some vegetation loss and whether that impacts on the conclusions of the ecology report.
Thank you. I think when you're doing a ecological survey for a retrospective planning application, you have to look at different variety of data, including from a desk study, which will... I think you need to review the data from a desk study, which includes looking at aerial photos, and also you need to apply proportionality. And I think in this case, the large proportion of the footprint of the application was a tennis court, and so there's only a very small bite of habitat that has been impacted by this. And that assessment has been made retrospectively through the review of desk study information and aerial photography. And I think through the provision of the mitigation and the landscape planting, we are satisfied that any loss in habitat has been provided through mitigation, and actually a bit of additionality because there's now 6 woody species being planted in the landscape scheme. So yes, you're right, when you go and do an ecological assessment of a retrospective planning application, you're not able to make the same level of assessment, but we are where we are. Retrospective planning applications do happen, and you have to make the best of, you have to use the best available data, and we're satisfied that that has taken place on this in this instance, and also the assessment's proportional to the likely impacts given the size of the development.
Councillor Gooch is next, definitely.
Right, okay, so basically I've been trying to make sense of the noise stuff because it's quite complicated, what's actually on the in the reports. And the thing that concerns me, it's a very high level of background noise there that they're reporting. And that's obviously due to the road, and it's due to the plant problems at the site. So they're basically saying, oh, it's only a few decibels more than it would be, but it's kind of like saying, well, we're already polluting the area with noise from a very loud plant, so it doesn't matter if we have this extra paddle noise as well. I'm just a bit concerned that they haven't actually got the full impact of the paddle noise. You've got paddle is always played by 2 players, from what I can glean. So instead of having sort of up to 4 players on a tennis court with strung bats and no glass, you've now got up to 8 players playing a much faster game with hard bats.
This is a time of questions.
Yes, I'm trying to get around to the question.
That would be great.
Yeah. So, have they looked at any kind of sound baffling, and did when there were people playing paddle on this court, was it just 2 people playing just to give them something of a background? Because they said the courts were in use, and I was really concerned that it seemed I couldn't work out whether both courts were in use at the time that they were doing the sound measurements, because certainly it didn't look like they were being used in November. There was only one date in March that they were actually being used.
Yeah, certainly, well, as I said before, they did a number of different assessments, and because of the problems they had of going there, the paddle courts weren't in use, then they also did this assessment through library data, so you don't need the people to be there playing with it. The other fact, one of the things, because this is a retrospective, which I think is important to note as well, that since the paddle courts have been in use, we haven't received any complaints about noise from them. And I did notice, certainly in the initial comments from residents in that area, there was no mention of noise from the paddle courts. Certainly with regard to the background levels, certainly at Homewood Gardens, they, and it's detailed in the report, they went to a lot of trouble to make sure that they weren't getting affected by background noise level from David Lloyd. That area there is less affected by the traffic noise, which we couldn't deal with. And I think certainly I do remember on the report that at one point they do mention 2 sort of really good players playing, so which would be noisier than the other situation. But I think I can't recall whether it does mention both courts were being played, but the assessment made with the library assessment, library data, takes into account both courts being played.
Okay.
Sorry, what is library data?
Well, I think in the report they call it library data. So they've had someone go to a paddle court, not at David Lloyd, at another, I don't even know if it was another David Lloyd, and from 10 metres they have watch them play paddle tennis and they're taking noise readings. So they have a noise level for when the ball hits the bat. They have a noise level for when the ball hits the wall. And they input all this into a computer model for like both courts. And then they can extrapolate that out to find out what the noise level should be at predicted noise levels at the nearby residents.
Right, it's just that the noise levels that are in this report are different to the noise levels that I'm reading on reports that other countries have done. And also the recommendations of, so they do mention the Dutch Lawn Tennis Association. And the Dutch Lawn Tennis Association recommends that you shouldn't have a paddle court within 100 metres of a house, whereas it's 50 for lawn tennis.
Well, we aren't in the Netherlands, but the point's sort of made, yeah. But presumably there are statutory levels of noise which become nuisance, and this, regardless of whether we find it annoying or slightly higher or slightly lower, does this come anywhere near you would consider a prosecution for?
Certainly. Is that on? Yeah. There isn't, unfortunately, a set level which says once noise goes above this level, it becomes a statutory nuisance. It's very much a balance of what the area's like, how loud it is, how often it occurs. And like, for instance here, if we were assessing this noise for nuisance, one of the things we have to take into account is the nature and locality of the area. So I think here the fact that it was a tennis court before and suddenly becomes a paddle court, there's a slight change there, but it's still a tennis court of sorts. So I think we would take that very much into account.
Okay, Councillor Durston.
Sorry, it's another noise question. Has there been any consideration of the impact of noise on the wildlife as well as on residents?
There hasn't been a specific assessment of that because, again, I refer back to the fact that it's got to be proportional, and as we're looking at something that was a tennis court and it's now paddle tennis court, it's the difference between a maximum of 4 people playing and now a maximum of 8 people playing. I think that because there is no specific protected species feature within the areas that are considered best practice surveys, there doesn't need to be that specific assessment. I think had there have been a very nearby bat roost, for example, then yeah, maybe, but I think that the assessment that has been made is sufficient and proportionate. It's a suburban environment. There's a lot of noise pollution there, just as there's a lot of artificial light pollution there already. So I think that any, for example, bat species that might be there, they'll be habituated to human activity already. And so I think that the ecological assessment appropriately assesses the impacts, and that I guess that by inference that includes noise impacts.
Thanks, Rachel. Councillor Stone, and then I'm minded to move, and then Councillor Pulteney, then I'm minded to move to the discussion.
Okay, yeah, we're just going back to this ecological assessment. I know that you've said that you haven't really done a firm ecological assessment because of the proportionality of the site, but due to the fact that Baydog Woods is an SNCI, would you not be minded to actually have done that ecological assessment through further than 20 metres from the actual paddle court? So that it can actually fully encompass the possible kind of detrimental effects on our natural environment, especially from now that we've included more lighting in the area. I mean, would you not have thought to have done that?
I really respect all the comments that have come in from the Friends of Baydocks Wood, and I absolutely honour that. However, the site is not within that designated site, and the ecological assessment has sort of discounted that because it's outside of the influence because of the nature of the development. I think if it was a development on a bit of habitat that might have been bat foraging habitat that was larger in size, then yes, there might have been a trigger for additional bat surveys, but it's going from astroturf to a different type of artificial surface with a very small bite into some previously undeveloped land. I don't think that I don't think that there would be impacts on Badock's Wood. The bit of habitat that's been taken out is in a bit of an ecological cul-de-sac. The shrub line that runs along the western boundary of the site doesn't lead into some other habitat that will be valuable to bats because it's a suburban environment. So the ecological assessment has discounted the impacts there. I think that looking at the site in a wider context, there's a shrub line that runs east-west, which connects Badock's Wood with other green infrastructure, and I think that's a lot more valuable for bats and other nocturnal species than this very small shrub band that runs along the western boundary. So I don't think, based on the information that has been provided to inform the planning application, I don't think that there is an impact on Badock's Wood as a ecological unit.
I hear loud and clear. Okay, you don't think, and that's my point. You don't think. So why can't we have an ecological assessment where we can actually provide the facts where that's concerned? At the end of the day, we can't speak, hypothetically. We can't actually, unless we go out and find out what's going on with the with bats or where they fly, where they go to, where they're eating from, whatever. Okay, why can't we just extend that 20-metre zone into a bigger area so we can actually find the full impact of those lights?
All we can do as Bristol City Council is make sure that best practice is adhered to, and best practice in terms of ecological assessment for a development of this size with the amount of habitat that may have been degraded as a result of this, best practice guidelines have been adhered to. So yes, it would be lovely to do baseline surveys of everything at all times. It's not a realistic approach, and it's not one that is found within the planning sphere. You've got to apply best practice and adhere to policies, and it's our opinion that those best practice guidelines have been adopted and the policies have been adhered to.
Councillor Pulteney, and then I'm going to... All right, Councillor Pulteney, then Councillor Peat. Okay, well, I'm having questions at the moment. Yeah, if you can just wait. Councillor Pulteney.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for the information that the work began in September 2023. The applicant's assessment of the ecology that was submitted to the website was first appeared in September 2024. Is that a safe guide to roughly what we're looking at? The applicant's ecology report was submitted a year after the work had begun.
The ecological survey was done in May of this year, so there was a winter. Like, what is it, 9 months difference between the change of use date of the 18th of September and the ecological assessment being undertaken. So yeah, there is a lag. It's a retrospective planning application, so there will be.
Which is what I was sort of tilting at, I suppose. In terms of its status as a retrospective planning application, it would strike me as a bit perverse and a bit peculiar, to be honest, if the way we were expected to look at the application in front of us was, what is the impact of this space transforming from what it is into what it is? As in, it's impossible to assess loss in that context. I'm assuming that's not the way that we're supposed to look at it. What is the baseline for that assessment in terms of the transformation? What's the effect of the development in planning terms when it's retrospective?
I think, yeah, in this instance, it's essentially the operational development, because in kind of planning terms, there is no actual kind of material change of use. Whilst we've obviously talked about the differences between sort of tennis and paddle tennis, like I say, in kind of land use terms, the overall use of the site remains kind of in a leisure use as a leisure complex. So this would be ancillary as kind of part of that wider use. So, like I say, the operational development, would be the floodlights, is the fencing, the other changes that have been made to the surfacing, for example. That all, I think, kind of triggers the need for planning permission, which is why we now have an application before us today.
And this is what is so confusing in terms of the loss of the trees. In that the officer's report makes a clear recommendation under condition 2. It feels it would be appropriate to condition the applicant to replace the trees that have been lost. On page 122 of the report, it says the applicant has provided no information as to how many trees have been lost. And the applicant's assessment in terms of the ecology report, that there are none of certain specific species on the site, is based on the fact that there is a lack of trees with these features. In other words, there are trees that have been lost,
other species?
I suppose what I'm trying to get to is it the case that under our policy and under the law that is, the applicant is entitled to materially benefit from this being a retrospective application? Is the applicant entitled to say, well, it's been done, we are where we are now, therefore you can't measure the change, therefore there's no impact?
In terms of vegetation loss, I wanted to highlight that there has been a ground level tree assessment undertaken, and that looked at the remaining vegetation. We acknowledge that there has been some loss, but the loss is relatively minor, and the types of trees that were left have been assessed for their suitability for bat roosts, for example, and it was assessed that this wasn't the type of vegetation that bats would find attractive to roost in. And Rachel may be able to expand on that. So hopefully that partially answers the question. And again, in terms of whether the applicant benefits from this being a retrospective planning application, we have to assess it on the basis of the best available information, and that's what we have in front of us. It's also worth highlighting that the vegetation loss and the tree loss are slightly different things and are assessed under slightly different policies. We have policies about nature conservation, which focuses on impacts of protected species. Now, we've had an ecology report that we're satisfied with, and we've also had a replacement shrub and tree replacement plan, or there's the vegetation replacement plan, which I can bring up on screen, actually, if people find that useful. And that shows... which is this plan here, which shows the area just in that corner. Oh, you can't see my cursor again, but it's the area marked A on that plan. That's where the replacement planting is going to take place. So that's been done in order to meet nature conservation policy and requirements. So it's providing some replacement habitat. The tree replacement is slightly separate. We have under planning policy something called the Bristol Tree Replacement Standard, which many of you will be familiar with. And that sets out that for trees lost, there is a standard by which they have to be replaced. And the amount of trees that need to be replaced is based on, firstly, the number of trees lost, and secondly, the size of trees, which is the girth of the trunk measured at 1 metre 20 centimetres above ground. So we've conditioned the applicant to provide details of which trees have been lost, and this is kind of more for arboriculture reasons, so trees as opposed to nature conservation, although obviously the two go hand in hand. And then that they have plenty of scope around their site, which is a large site, to plant replacement trees. So you've got those two elements, two separate topics, if you like.
I see. So as soon as the applicant tells us how many trees they cut down, we can require them to replace them?
Correct. Yes, and it's against the standard, so not necessarily the loss of one equals planting one. It depends on how big they were. So the larger the trees that were cut down, again, based on trunk girth at 1 metre, 1.2 metres above ground level, then the wider that gets, the more trees you have to replant.
Okay, but we currently don't know how many trees were cut down.
Currently we don't, but we've required that information to be provided under condition, and the arboricultural officer was satisfied with that. I also ran the condition past the applicant, who accepted the potential for that condition.
I'm sure. Absolutely final thing, it's a minor technical query, but just in relation to the sustainability assessment, which was judged not to be necessary on the grounds that this is a building. And can I just confirm that for planning purposes, both a tennis court and a paddle court are buildings?
I'm just looking back to my report, and this references our climate change and sustainability practice note, and that sets out the exceptions for the requirement to produce a sustainability. The reason it's exempt is that it's an alteration to an existing non-residential building, and for the purposes of that, the whole of the site encompasses a non-residential building. It's a change, and I suppose it's an alteration in that sense. We've got to kind of interpret guidance as best we can, and the exemptions that are set out in that guidance don't cover every single requirement, but looking at it, the spirit of the guidance and the examples given included what was proposed here. I think it's worth noting that generally that sustainability and climate change practice guidance is based on looking at things like, can the proposals regenerate renewable energy? So if you have a house, you would expect solar panels to be mounted on it. In this case, we've got a change from a tennis court to a paddle court, so it's very difficult for those policies to be applied. So that's why those exemptions exist.
I see, just for clarity in this case, because the proposed heat lamps will just be heating the open air rather than an actual building, it's exempt from a sustainability report, and that's our policy.
It's not our policy, it's just saying that these proposals are exempt from the requirement to produce a sustainability and energy statement. So it's not policy, no.
Any more questions before we move to discussion? Right, these are questions, are they? Councillor Durston, Councillor Pete, and then that's the end of questions, please.
Mine's just the discussion, I don't...
Okay, then Councillor Durston, before we move to the discussion.
Thank you. In the reports that were sent to us, there's mention of a luminance report is it luminance report being done within 2 months? Is there a reason, given that the paddle court's already up and running, that couldn't have been done before and then brought to us to look at today?
That condition was suggested, I believe, by the pollution control officer prior to the applicant then producing something, which I think I have on a slide somewhere here. It's basically a Lux spill plan. There it is. So this is a Lux spill plan. I don't know how well you can see it, but basically the numbers on this plan are equivalent to lux, which is a unit of light, so it's the amount of light that falls on a surface. And you'll see that the red line is the outer area where you would get light falling. The blue line is the site boundary, and the red line is where the paddle tennis courts will be. So the highest readings that you're getting there at the right by where the lights are slightly in excess of 300 lux. And the light at the footpath, again, this is in my report. These numbers are very small to see on screen, apologies. Okay, so at the boundary of the site, the lux spill would be up to approximately 64 lux, which is the equivalent of light levels on a gloomy day. So there would be some light spill onto the footpath. Within approximately 20 metres of the boundary fence, the lux level declines to 1, which is the equivalent of deep twilight. By 35 metres away from the boundary fence, the lux level is 0. And in addition, I think it's worth pointing out that the trees that are in place, which you can see on the photos that I showed earlier, will block out some of the light, and this isn't actually taken into account as this lux spill plan, so it's likely that the situation is better than what's shown on the plan. So that's why we didn't add this condition, because it's already been provided and we've looked at it.
Okay, so there's no further report to come on lighting from past this?
No, this is the information that we've had, which shows how far light would spill onto the surrounding area.
Okay, I'm moving to discussion now, if I may.
Could I propose an amendment?
No.
Oh.
You can discuss, and then later you can propose an amendment.
Okay.
Although you could mention the basic framework of what you'd like in an amendment in the discussion, but you're second after Councillor.
So if I just open up, this is very... I'm not first.
Second, could Councillor Pete actually did put her hand up for discussion first, then you may come in Councillor O'Rourke, and then I'll make a list.
So I have a couple of reservations here. Firstly, I hadn't very little idea how popular paddleball was until this application, and I still don't think it's more popular than tennis, so I find it hard to justify that lighting a paddleball court in lieu of preserving local ecology is worth it. Secondly, I would have been more minded to permit this application if it were for public use, but it's not. I do not see why someone who wants to play paddleboard at an exclusive club at 10 p.m. in the middle of December should be able to do so at the expense of A, locals who have to deal with the light and noise pollution, and B, the local ecology. Thirdly, I simply do not see why floodlights are necessary. You can make the argument that people want to play in the dark, but frankly, if it's dark, it's going to be cold. And how viable is it that David Lloyd will be able to actually make money from this floodlighting when it's cold, windy, hailing, or sleeting outside? Paddleball and tennis require good conditions. If the floodlights are in use, that would simply imply there's not good conditions. Therefore, I will not be voting in favour of this application. However, I may vote in favour of an amendment that would see a highly reduced time frame for the usage of the floodlights. For example, motion censored between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. in the summer and spring, and 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. in the winter and autumn as a minimum. As an ideal, I would like to see no floodlights, for there to be public access, and for a plan to see community and ecological enrichment with the planting of more trees and flowers.
Councillor O'Rourke.
So, you know, I've been listening to the officers' reports, and I can see, I do see that there's a perception of the doubling of the size and the 8 players with the harder bats and all of those sort of things. I think there must be some perception of nuisance. But yet we're told that since the courts have been in play, there have been no complaints. How much weight do you give to that? Is that because people just are worn down by it? Or, you know, is there noise nuisance or isn't there? I mean, that's something that we still, I suppose, in a way have to ponder. But, you know, we've been told by the ecological officer, that, you know, the desktop study was done. We can count the tree trunks. They're going to put the trees back in. The tree forum are not complaining. Vegetation is going to be added back in. I don't think this is a question, I suppose, in a way, but it's sort of rhetorical. I don't think that the fact that it's only people who can afford the membership for David Lloyd's that can play there is a material consideration. So, you know, I may not like that, but I can't really give that any weight. So I suppose you can see where I'm coming to on all of this. I mean, it does leave a dirty taste in our mouths. But it seems to me that I possibly would, with an amendment, to change the hours. And I mean, to talk about the Lux spill thing, I mean, that was quite persuasive in a way. I mean, you can't deny the facts that are there. So I think that I would suggest that it would go in line with Henley's tennis court, so that it stops at 9 o'clock at night. And I suppose if there was something like that, I might be minded to vote for it.
Okay, I think it's Councillor Gooch next, and then Councillor Thurston.
Yeah, so, well, again, I'm still talking about noise, sorry. So, they've done these recordings at ST1, which is on the Westbury-on-Trim side in the residential area, and they've done the recordings on the Southmead side of the residential area, which is the one with all the noise. So it's interesting that even though they were there and they recorded from the Southmead side where the road is, while paddle was going on, they didn't record, as far as I can tell from these, they haven't got with and without paddle from the Westbury side when the noise was going on. They recorded on the day that, so the evening in March when they recorded, it was after the paddle had finished playing, so it was after 9 p.m. So I'm just a bit confused. Why is there inconsistency between the recordings of both sides? So there's different information provided at ST1 to what's provided at ST2. The reason I've been looking into, you know, the sound is is because I've had people come to me, the constituents. The recommendations that I've read all about paddle versus tennis, they're saying that on average, paddle is about 10 decibels louder than tennis. So that's due to the nature of the bats and the hard walls, etc. The Lawn Tennis Association haven't got onto this yet, basically. And it is tennis associations that register. So I had a look at the LTA, and they've got guidance on how to build the site, and also how to put soundproofing up, but they haven't really talked about how far away you should site the courts. So the recommendation is that for courts for tennis, you don't build them within 50 metres. The nearest house, I've measured it, is 57 metres. So they're just outside of what you can do legally for a tennis court. Now, we haven't got any registration or guidance or rules yet for paddle. The cynic in me is thinking, well, they've done it now and asked for it retrospectively because they wanted to get in before anyone did any rules. Because if they put it at 100 metres, which the Dutch have done, they wouldn't be able to do it. The Dutch are often ahead of us with all sorts of things, certainly. And I think that's the case, that the LDA probably will be putting guidance in place. Obviously, I'm only speculating, they may not, but this is for a discussion, so we can discuss it. The thing that worries me is that people describe the sound as like gunfire. And if you've got 8 people playing quite rapidly, it can be bang, 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 and it's quite an intrusive noise. So even though it's not necessarily louder than the road noise, it's the quality of the sound that is kind of, you know, what's the word, penetrating. So that is what worries me. The other thing is playing till 10 p.m. at night. So there are children living in these houses, and for some reason, it's less on a Saturday night. They close earlier than they do on a school night. Surely you want your children to be able to go to bed and not be disturbed by noises of something that sounds like gunfire. So it's, yeah, the hours and the penetration of the noise is really what's bugging me. And you know, why couldn't it just be kept as a tennis court, which is actually quite a pleasantish sound to listen to, as opposed to something that sounds more like squash.
Councillor Durston, did you have something? No, you didn't. Oh, that's great. Councillor Stone, was it? Maybe I got my list. My pen's breaking, so I can't read my own writing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for me. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, I'd just like to
thank you.
Kind of just state the matter that what we have here is we have a lot more lux, a lot more noise. We have an SNCI right next to it. I don't think there has been proper consultation. I think that could be a possible material consideration to actually at least defer it, to have some kind of proper consultation.
I think officers made it clear that the consultation requirement has been done to a statutory level.
I can't
you may think there should be more done, but
yeah, well,
I don't. It isn't.
Well, maybe
material.
we need to defer it to have that proper consultation done. I think the ecological report, from what I'm hearing, you know, it hasn't considered the local SNCI. It's possibly considered just the space around it, definitely. So there's loads of things that I just don't understand. Why David Lloyd decided to do this without proper consultation, without proper planning. I mean, I think it's quite outrageous. Maybe that could be I know it shouldn't be, but it should be. So, you know, I'm mindful to defer this for better consultation and a better ecological report, to be honest with you. That's how I'm minded to do it.
Councillor Poultney.
Thanks, Chair. I find myself in the, well, slightly less so, but initially, somewhat unusual position to find myself agreeing very firmly with colleagues across the benches here. I do sympathise with Councillor O'Rourke. You know, there's so much here that is emotive that we can't take into account. It's really clear, and I'm absolutely baffled that David Lloyd have taken what must be astonishing reputational risk, not only in Bristol, it turns out, but also in Stockport, Ellesmere and Poole, to just simply press ahead and do this work without going through what is an absolutely basic legal process. An organisation of that size, was it willful, or was it just total ignorance of the basics of the law? Is really astonishing and a bit baffling. But here we are. What I find in this case again and again is that there is conflicting information. We have information from the local residents, Friends of Baydox Wood, and this is an absolutely beloved site of nature conservation. I am struck by how much commitment that group has shown to this site over the years. I'm also slightly baffled. When you look up on Bristol City Council's website, there's an ancient historic monument in Baydox Wood. I'm not sure if that was of any relevance.
There is indeed, but I don't think the paddleboard will have any effect on that cumulus. No.
No, fair enough.
It's been there thousands of years.
Call me by surprise. But in this case, we have information from local residents, from a local residents group. We have that evidence here. We also have evidence from the applicant, and the council has followed best practice and gone with the applicant's assessments of all of these things, even where the information is yet to be provided. On that basis, I have to admit, I am still in a position where I could go either way, depending on the data that we haven't seen and which of the parties to this application turns out to be correct or not. And on that basis, I have to admit, I'm, like my colleague, minded to pursue a deferral to allow us to get more information about the quality of the ecology on site, to see whether the public forum can be substantiated, or to see whether the applicant's quite correct and there's nothing there worth preserving. It is an SNCI, and on that basis, I think that's what I'd be proposing.
Councillor Gooch, you've already had your closing comments. Do you wish to have further closing comments? Oh, wasn't it? Well, that's kind of what we're on. But anyway, it's a discussion. All right. Councillor Peat first, and then Councillor Gooch.
I think there is... We all are in this position of like, well, there's just things about it we just don't like. And I think we should adjourn so that we can think about conditions that we actually want to put on it. This conversation is going on a really long time. Yes, we can defer, we can adjourn. Either one I'm fine with, but I think we really need to kind of figure out what it is that we actually want from this, whether we're going to approve with conditions or just reject, and we just seem to be going back and forth.
That is the process we're working through. Yes, if you're frustrated with it, I'm also frustrated with it, but I'm trying to follow the process.
I just
Councillor
think we need specific things that we actually across party can agree on, and I'm seeing certain little bits of like, yeah, that's something I like, that's something I appreciate, but I would like to actually get to a point where I think the problem with this specific format of discussion is it's not a circular table where we're writing on a whiteboard saying, yes, all people like this, something like this. It's these speeches, and I know I'm literally in one, but it just doesn't seem like a good way to actually get a proposal together for this particular issue.
Okay, it's a legal process. Councillor Gooch had her hand up next.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I had been wanting to actually go up and visit the site and go to the houses and listen for, when paddle's taking place. But to be honest, in the last few weeks, apart from this week, where I've been away, it's been raining the whole time, and really dull. And I was thinking, well, no one's going to be playing paddle in this. So I do want to go up on a nice day and see for myself
Very
what
welcome
it sounds
to.
like.
Yeah.
So I would be happy to defer.
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, Councillor Durston.
I just wondered if Jonathan could talk through the conditions that he suggested before.
Could we follow the process, please?
Okay.
And then I will come to the possibility of the conditions. Councillor O'Rourke.
First of all, I'd just like to clarify with Zoe that I don't quite know what you were referring to about if we could cross-party come to some sort of an agreement. That's not how this committee works. It's a regulatory committee. We all stand here individually. And I think also I'm minded now to think that, having listened to other people's comments, that I think I would be much happier to actually do a site visit, and I think I would propose that we postpone, defer, and organise a site visit, because we can't really do an evaluation as it seems. Should I propose that and we could take that to a vote?
Do we have any other contributions to the discussion? We don't. In that case, I have the process here, and I'm going to follow it exactly. I'm reading it from this thing. So, and I'm aware that some people wish to have suggested amendments and conditions, etc. Therefore, I am going to follow the process without shortcut or deviation. The first thing is I propose the officer's recommendation and I ask for a seconder. Should a person second it, that means that in principle we can vote in line with that, and that means I can then move on to ask if there are any amendments to the substantive motion, given that we have agreed that there's two people who would like to take forward the substantive motion, albeit amended or not amended. So, I am proposing now, it's right there in front of you in the blue thing, and I'm following it word by word. I am proposing the officer recommendation. I'm asking if anyone wishes to second that officer recommendation. No? Yes. Lisa would like to second that. Councillor Durston would like to second it. Given that there is interest in taking that forward, albeit that some people would like to amend it, possibly, would anyone like to propose an amendment to the officer's motion? Councillor O'Rourke.
No, I don't.
I would love to think that rather than having different amendments coming forwards and the process being confused, that we could put together an amendment that may attract support. Councillor O'Rourke, could you suggest what the elements might be in an amendment that might attract support? Councillor O'Rourke, why was your hand up? If you
Well, if I would, my amendment would be to defer. So
that's not an amendment.
That's not an amendment. So that's why we've.
No. Councillor O'Rourke had her hand up. Councillor Stone. No, you're quite entitled. I'm just pointing out to Councillor Stone that her hand was up, and she wished to negate the substantive motion. That's not allowed. Do you have a proposed amendment, anyone? Councillor Durston.
Can I do an amendment to
You
something that I've
certainly can.
seconded?
Well, and we will vote on it.
So it was around bringing in more reasonable hours for the operation of the paddle court, so moving that from 9 till 9.
I'm just asking
Sorry.
Jonathan to copy this down so we make sure that's something that would be ultimately enforceable. So it's a reasonable amendment I can put to the committee. Yes, sorry. Anything else?
Bringing in more bat-friendly lighting.
Okay.
And
delegate the actual details of that to officers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then something around enforcement of the amplified music in the social area.
Enforcement, no amplified music between certain hours. What would you...
Yeah, I think, officer view on that would be a reasonable condition, for the committee to impose should it see fit. And also in terms of those other points, yes, we could certainly request some further details with regard to lighting, and also in terms of the hours condition, which is condition 4, to restrict that further between the hours of 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Again, should the committee see fit.
Okay. Anything else? So we have a change to the lighting in line with officer recommendation. We have a restriction on the hours of operation, and we also have no amplified or delegated to officers to make some put restrictions on the use of amplified music. So perhaps there might be a Saturday when there was something there, but it wouldn't actually have outdoor amplified music the whole time. Again, I think we'll have to delegate some of this detail to officers. We can't hammer that together here. Now, so I have there an amendment to the substantive motion. So that's proposed by Councillor Durston. I will second it. I'm going to go around now and find out who will vote for that amendment to the motion. Not the amended motion, the amendment. Councillor Pulteney.
Against.
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 Councillor O'Rourke.
I'm going to vote for.
Councillor Badruddin.
Against.
Councillor Gooch.
Against.
Councillor Durston.
For.
Councillor Pete.
I'm so sorry, Lisa. Against.
And myself for. So that falls then. So the motion as a whole, we vote on the unamended motion. Okay? Which is a recommendation to approve. Seconded. Right. Councillor. Do I have a seconder? In fact, do I have a seconder? I don't, in fact, have. Therefore, it falls. Okay. I cannot promise you that we will have a site visit. That's something that will need to be discussed, Councillor Pulteney.
In light of the protocol, Chair, because obviously the protocol says what it says, I'd be inclined to move a motion proposing a deferral pending the submission of further information on the ecology of the site and in line with the suggestion from Councillor O'Rourke earlier.
Yes, okay. So a site visit, we hope, and a further look at the ecology.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful from an office perspective if we could just have a clearer steer on exactly what it is the committee would like to see.
Otherwise, you aren't going to get it.
Okay, I think, from what I can gather, I think what we would like to see is we would like to have a site visit so we can hear and see and find out exactly what the paddle courts, what the detrimental effects of the paddle courts is going to have on the SNCI. I know that the courts are not in the SNCI, but the SNCI is right next to the courts, and we need to find out what is it, how that's going to be, how the paddle courts are going to affect that. Therefore, that's why we need to extend an ecological survey and conversation about how the paddle courts are going to affect the SNCI, and also some kind of consultation I think needs to be had with the local community about the new paddle courts.
Obviously, if it's negatively affecting the SNCI, we are now deferring sorting that problem out. But anyway, that is, Councillor Pulteney.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Just, Chair, in response to Mr. Diamond's request, I'd say, in terms of getting clarity, it's to give both the objectors, Friends of Baydox Wood, and other people who've made submissions to this, the opportunity to submit further evidence substantiating what's in their statements today to the standards afforded to the applicant in terms of best practices identified by the Council's ecology officer, and for the Council to conduct any verification it needs to in terms of establishing which is correct. Is it what's coming from the applicant, or is it what's coming in terms of public forum?
Well, the council has actually given its own view, to be honest. So it's not endorsed either. It has given its own view, and the council's officers, I think, would like to say that they have nothing further to add. You're welcome to ask them for more, but I think their honest answer is they've not got anything further to add in this case.
That's
That's
what we're asking.
If for your own reasons you wish to continue to ask them, but then obviously a deferral of a damaging situation is to increase damage, but I accept that that's the view of the committee. Okay, so I have a proposer then for deferral to a future meeting.
Yes, Chair, unless any of the officers would suggest anything else that should go in the motion to defer that would be that they would recommend.
Thank you. I mean, one comment I would make just with regards to further consultation is in terms of the planning process and kind of the role of the LPA, there is no reason at this stage for us to undertake further consultation in terms of writing to neighbours, etc. So I just wanted to make that clear. In the event that the applicant were to submit additional information to us, that may trigger kind of the need to reconsult. But in the absence of that, we have consulted as part of the planning process, so there's no reason for us to do that again.
And indeed no budget to do that again.
So
you propose deferral.
I propose deferral, yes.
So do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Pete. Okay, those who are for deferral? Sorry.
Yes.
A deferral for a site visit.
And the submission of any further information, obviously, to clarify any of the points
For who
raised.
to submit what?
For anyone to submit any points in furtherance of the points raised by the committee.
To who?
Today. To the committee.
To the committee. So people give time for people to write to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And provide clarity and further information on the submissions that we've seen today, if they wish to.
Okay, so time to arrange a site visit and more time for people to write to us.
Personally, I would like to perhaps survey some of the residents to see what kind of timeframes they would like the floodlights to be on till, stuff like that. And I'm happy to take that work up myself to save officer time. But okay, but I just want to know, like, it's all good, all well and good us, saying, 10 p.m, 9 p.m, but really we don't know what the families want who have to deal with the floodlights.
But that's why I was asking for a consultation. I mean,
I think, Chair, my proposal, such as it was, I'm happy for it to be worded by officers. I don't think there's anything in there that would rule anything out that I'd be hoping to see, and deferral pending a site visit seems like a perfectly reasonable course of action taken by this committee on many occasions.
Okay, a deferral pending a site visit. A seconder, Councillor Pete. For that, hands up please. Against that, 2. Hands up 4. Against. Thank you. Meeting is concluded. Thank you.